Good evening. I would like to call tonight's meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Searcy.
Here.
Councilmember Fulcher.
Present.
Councilmember DeBala.
Present.
Councilmember Gibson.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Small.
Yep.
And And Councilmember Honzak cannot join us tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone. We have a number of items on the agenda this evening. We'll start with a proclamation in honor of our crossing guards. And then we have a number of items today in our voting session. The first is a resolution establishing the FY 2026 budget policies. The second item is a resolution authorizing submittal of 2025 legislative action requests to the Maryland Municipal League. The third is a resolution providing for resident appointments to the Police Employees Retirement Plan Committee. We will then have 3 work session items. The first is administrative regulations addressing processes to request, evaluate, and advance traffic calming and sidewalk installations. The second is a quarterly financial report for the third quarter, and the FY 2024 budget amendment number 4. In terms of upcoming meetings, so next Wednesday we will meet at our regular time of 7:30. We will begin with a proclamation recognizing Gun Violence Awareness Day, which is June the 7th. We'll have a voting session that consists of the first reading ordinance approving the FY 2024 budget amendment number 4. And then we will have a series of work sessions, tentatively an update on planning for the November 5th, 2024 city election and recommended code adjustments, library construction project update, as well as a tentative discussion of the council repeal of resolution 2015/32 policy for a new sidewalk design and installation. On Wednesday, June the 12th, the council will meet at its regular time. We will start with a proclamation in honor of Pollinator Week. We will also have a presentation on the results of the Laurel Avenue traffic study. And then we'll have a number of voting sessions. The first is the second reading ordinance approving the FY 2024 budget amendment number 4. First reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code Title 5, Chapter 518, mail-in ballot voting, and Chapter 512, fair election practices. We'll also have tentatively on the agenda resolution rescinding resolution 2015-32, replaced by the new administrative regulations for traffic calming. And then we will have a police vehicle purchase ordinance voting session. We'll also have a series of work sessions. First is administrative regulation regarding the use of certain public facilities. The second is emergency operations plans. Tentatively, we have slated a discussion of Sustainable Maryland committee recommendations, followed by board and committee appointment recommendations. As a reminder, Sunday, June the 16th is Father's Day, and Wednesday, June the 19th is Juneteenth. City offices and facilities are closed for the Juneteenth holiday. On Wednesday, June the 19th, the City Council will not meet because it is a holiday. And just as a reminder, on Sunday, June the 23rd through Wednesday, June the 26th, many of us will be attending the Maryland Municipal League Summer Conference in Ocean City, and therefore we will not meet on Wednesday, June the 26th, because we will be at the conference. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move into our proclamation for the evening. Mayoral Proclamation in honor of Crossing Guard Appreciation Day 2024. Whereas the city of Tacoma Park is home to thousands of school-aged children whose safety and well-being is fundamental. And whereas the city prioritizes public safety and the significant role of education to ensure the protection of our children and the crossing guards to assist them to teach them to look both ways before crossing the street and other essential safety rules. And whereas each school day, regardless of weather, our dedicated and loyal school crossing guards ensure the safety of our children and families as they arrive to and depart from school. And whereas school crossing guards provide essential public safety and services to our community, yet they encounter adversarial, dangerous, and sometimes hostile attitudes during the performance of their duties. And whereas motorists should be aware of children walking to and from school and be especially cautious in and around school zones. They should follow the directions of all crossing guards and recognize that by doing so, road safety can be improved. And whereas 2 crossing guards, Harriet Saxon, serving 11 years and our longest serving crossing guard, Virginia Miss Liz James, with 25 years of service, will be retiring. We thank them for providing noteworthy service to the city and helping to ensure the safety of our children and residents. And whereas the commendable service, responsibility, and professionalism demonstrated by our school crossing guards is deserving of acknowledgement and praise for their diligent efforts to protect our children and families, is recognized annually on Safe Routes to School Crossing Guard Appreciation Day. Now, therefore, I, Talisha Searcy, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, hereby proclaim June the 5th, 2024, as Crossing Guard Appreciation Day in the City of Tacoma Park. And I urge all residents to join me in this special observance. So I do want to recognize our crossing guards that are here today, and if you would like to come up on the stage so we could take a picture. I know you're not prepared for that, but yes, well, come on out. You look great.
Before you get to that part, I would just like to say that one of the joys of being a person who works from home and picks up kids is watching our crossing guards get an innumerable number of hugs from children every day because they are beloved by them.
All right. So thank you again to our crossing guards for being here tonight and so much for your service protecting our children.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We really do.
Okay, so we're going to move on to public comments this evening. Do we have any public comments on voting items? And just as a reminder, the voting items this evening is a resolution establishing the FY 2026 budget policies, resolution authorizing submittal of 2025 legislative action requests to the Maryland Municipal League, as well as a resolution providing for resident appointments to the Police Employees Retirement Plan Committee. Do we have any comments on voting items for this evening? Okay. Do we have any virtual comments on voting items this evening? No. Okay. So now we're going to move forward on general public comments. Do you have any general public comments this evening?
Good evening. Good evening. Diana Cohn, 16 Jefferson Avenue. And I am here tonight on behalf of Historic Tacoma. We are pleased to announce the return of our House and Garden Tour after several years lost to COVID. This marks the return of a tradition that goes back to 1973. This year's tour, a self-guided tour, is titled Old and New Poplar. That's a hint. The focus is on the evolution of a neighborhood over time. It will showcase houses built from the late 19th century to the present. Whoops, sorry. And I didn't tell you the date of the tour. It is Sunday, July 9, from 1 to 5 p.m. The tickets are $30, $30, and you can buy them in 3 separate ways. You can buy them in advance online. It's historictacoma.org. Or you can buy them at the co-op, or you can come on the day of the tour, Sunday, June 9th, and buy the tickets at the ticket stand, which is at the co-op. Again, a little bit of a hint of where you'll be going. So we look forward to seeing everyone, and we hope that this continuation of a tradition helps the neighborhood understand the kinds of houses that create the community that is Takoma Park. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Do we have any other general public comments this evening?
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunis, and I'm volunteering to coordinate our blood drive this June. It'll be Saturday, June 1st, this coming Saturday, in just a couple days. The police department and Inova Blood Donor Services are coordinating to put on the blood drive over here in Azalea Room. It'll be from 11:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon. People can search for the Takoma Park blood drive on Inova's website. That's inovablooddonorservices.org. And for Takoma Park people only, we will have these lovely shirts, either in blue or gold, that says I've got heart, and it talks about Inova and Takoma Park. So nobody else gets these shirts. I think Inova might be bringing some other shirts, but these are the ones that are exclusive for Takoma Park. So we hope to see people there. There's still a few more spots for people to register online, or I think we might be able to take some walk-ins as well. So again, that's going to be Saturday, June 1st in the Azalea Room, and I know we have one of our council members already registered to donate, and that'll be from 11:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Do you have any other general public comments?
Good evening. My name's David Reed, Ward 2. I'm president of Long Branch Sligo Community Association, on whose behalf I'm speaking to you this evening. And I'd like to begin by expressing the association's gratitude to Councilmember Dybala for her steady support in addressing traffic calming issues that we've tried to face over the past years. Thank you very much. So we currently have 3 important traffic challenges in our neighborhood. First challenge is on Lower Flower Avenue, where drivers speed down the hill and refuse to obey stop signs. The drivers constantly put bikers and hikers on the Sligo Trail at risk. They also threaten families with young children who use the neighborhood park. So for many years, we've been seeking any number of fundamental changes, as Councilwoman Dybala knows, to eliminate those threats. The second challenge we face is at the corner of Garland and Davis Avenues, where we are seeking a permanent stop sign. The problem is not just lawn management and home improvement trucks cutting through the neighborhood, it's also the Montgomery County public school bus drivers floor their vehicles along Garland Avenue with absolute disregard for children and adults. The third challenge we face is speeders cutting through the neighborhoods as they race between Piney Branch and New Hampshire Avenues, particularly during the weekends when Sligo Creek Parkway is closed. To address this problem, we are seeking an overall speed reduction to 15 miles per hour in our defined geography. And if I'm not mistaken, there are actually 3 distinct processes required to address the problems that I've listed. One requires an investigation authorized by the city manager. The second requires specific procedures at the Department of Public Works, while the third requires a prior citywide assessment of geographies with speeding problems. So how are we to follow these distinct processes? How are we to figure out how our projects ranks among the many others that are seeking remedial activities? Will there be a public portal through which we can follow these different processes as we try to solve our problems? And what should we do after 6 months or even 2 years without full adequate information about where things stand? So a second concern is, why can't a community association initiate requests for investigation of a problem? It seems self-evident to me that city staff would like to know that a community is fully behind a request and ready to provide support. And third, it makes sense to have impartial, clear criteria to evaluate each situation. But how are the 5 assessment criteria and the 25 sub-criteria weighed in different locations that have very different needs? Assessments need to be tailored to specific contexts, getting rid of some criteria, I believe, and emphasizing others. And I further question the use of the same criteria for traffic calming and sidewalk construction needs. So I hope our association's comments will further the strength and the efforts of so many of you to improve our neighborhood safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other general public comments?
Evening. Jessica Landman, Ward 1, and speaking tonight with, as a former chair of the Complete Safe Streets Committee, the now defunct committee. I'm not going to repeat the comments that you got from me in writing earlier yesterday about the traffic calming and sidewalk application, but I did want to mention a few key issues in those comments that I thought deserved a little special focus. One thing that I wanted to really focus on is the equity issue. The most important thing, in my view, from what the comments were made by the Complete Safe Streets Committee to you in reaction to the request that was made by your predecessor, council, was to really address gaps that existed in the city's sidewalk system going back to 10 years ago when the study was made by the city. I don't know that you ever did get the revised map that was mentioned. I wonder whether you could answer that, and I apologize for not knowing if that's something that you did get, but I wonder if you could take a look at that map and see if there are gaps in the sidewalks and really prioritize filling any of those remaining gaps, and compare that map to school routes, safe routes to school, and that set up criteria. I don't see that in the list of criteria that you're considering. Then I would urge you to consider having a different type of budgeting that you take into consideration, and consider a unified budget approach that does not assume that there's one set of money for maintenance of existing sidewalks and another set of money for new sidewalks, but instead consider an overall budgeting process where all sidewalks are coming out of the same pot of money, so that way I think filling gaps in sidewalks gets considered at the same time, and maybe that way people don't get a new sidewalk on my street when other people are still waiting to get a sidewalk in the first place. I don't think that's fair, and I think that's why some parts of the city are still waiting while I keep getting new ramps and new sidewalks in Ward 1. I just don't think that that has resulted in equity, and I think it should be prioritized. And third, please do change the language about permanent residents being the only ones who can request attention in these 2 sets of regulations. That language, I think, is unintentionally prejudicial sounding. I don't see why it should, first of all, only be permanent residents. It sounds like renters aren't welcome. That's certainly not your intention. And secondly, why should it only be residents? I think, for example, a crossing guard or a school bus driver might be more aware than anybody else about a problem. Now, this could be language that's been changed since I saw the draft, but I thought that was unhelpful language. So finally, let me just encourage you to consider prioritizing transparency and public accountability here by making the list of sites that you're considering public, and listing the criteria that you used and the weighting and how sites wound up on the list and where they wound up and what the timeline is for addressing them. That will really help. And finally, consider reconstituting the Complete Safe Streets Committee, making it broader, a public mobility committee considering access. And that way you can put these topics back in the public's sphere and try and make sure that you have representation from each and every ward on the committee. I think that would have been better than eliminating the committee, which is what happened. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other general public comments this evening? Do we have any virtual comments?
We have Emily Rose McCrae on the line.
Excellent.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Apologies that I'm not there in person, and thank you for making this possible to contribute via Zoom. I'm hoping to make it to bedtime in just a little bit. What I wanted to speak to you all about is the fact that there has been our only police surveillance camera is currently now across the mobile camera is currently across the street from my house, where it's conveniently located to look into the windows of myself and my neighbors, but not so much any of particular areas of concern at the moment. And we were all pretty shocked to have a camera show up across the street. We were able to, Corporal Sims was very kind about turning off the flashing red and blue lights so that our kids could get to sleep, but the camera is still looking into our homes, and frankly, mostly what you're getting is my 3-year-old playing with the curtains, which is probably not what was intended. And I know we only have one camera, so maybe some of these things haven't been considered before, but I think it would be really helpful if any time we are using one of these public safety cameras to address the significant crime and public safety concerns that exist in Tacoma Park, we take a couple steps. One is if we could actually make sure, as wonderful as the evidence-based policing is and using evidence to confirm that, and data to confirm that cameras are supportive if they are, it's not necessarily relevant in areas like the Pinecrest neighborhood because we border 2 other police jurisdictions. And so a lot of what happens here happens because of our location, and surveillance isn't really going to help. In fact, the specific issue this was put in place to address somehow happened at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, which surveillance is obviously not going to matter. There were people everywhere at that time. And it's something where a better impact might actually be something traffic calming. But it would be very helpful if going forward, there was a little bit more information coming from the police department when these kinds of things are deployed. Maybe an announcement to the general public about how long the recordings will be stored and where, and what happens to footage that doesn't contain recordings of a crime, how that determination is going to be made. I know we don't have enough officers to have someone watching all of this footage. Will the recordings be run through any sort of internal or external tools, such as a facial recognition tool? And will they be added to any internal or external databases? Are we selling the recordings? I know a lot of police departments are selling data as a way to create revenue. So will we be trying to generate revenue in funds, actual or in kind, for the police department using any of these recordings? And then also, why was this location chosen? What are the case references? And what actions are being taken to protect against unlawful surveillance of residents? So apologies, I went over there.
No problem. Thank you very much for your feedback. And I've heard you say you live in the Pinecrest neighborhood. If you wouldn't mind just shooting me an email so that we can make sure that we know a way to contact you, so that we have your information from the sign up. But if you want to shoot me an email as well, and then that way we can follow up offline about this matter.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
No worries. Do we have any additional public comments or virtual comments on voting items? Great. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move into our council comments. Do we have council comments this evening? Councilmember Small.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to do what I regard to be a pretty important shout out for the Crossroads Market, which was today. In particular, I am a person who likes drinks. I don't really like snacks. I'm a drinks person. So I was walking through there because I was enjoying the neighborhood and planning my post about how there's always parking at the Crossroads Market for social media. And I came across a lovely little stand that is a Tacoma Park business that was incubated in our incubator. And while I was talking to, and I have to get it right because it was a Zelle transaction because the other thing wasn't working, so it's going to take me a second. But I want to get her name right because she did say something that's really important for, I believe, for an entire HCD staff and for sure for the economic development staff. So I don't want to get her name wrong. But she said that she had changed her life because of the Crossroads Market. And that in particular, if she had not had the opportunity to use the incubator kitchen, she didn't know if she would be so successful as she is today. And so I wanted to make sure that we said that out loud for a couple of reasons, because we do have two farmers markets in town. One of them is on Wednesdays. It's right off of Ann Street, and there is always ample parking. I know that the one that's on the weekends can sometimes get constrained since it's not as parking friendly. But I would like to say that from a cultural standpoint and from a really vibrant neighborhood standpoint, it's just really a delight to be over there. And I wanted to make sure I did that before we start doing other kinds of weird advocacy, self-advocacy, because there are lots of reasons and lots of ways that we can promote equity in this fine city. But one of them is just having the courage to get into your car and go to a place that you wouldn't normally go, which is crazy to me because it's only 2.2 miles, but nonetheless true. Just like the volume of traffic difficulties that border the ward get caught up in the jurisdictions, I do think sometimes that the perceptions that people have about the diversity do not lead to an appreciation of the vibrancy and the variety. And while we're trying to make sure that the policy things don't make it look like that, I think it's important for people who live here to also not make it look like that. So thank you. I'll point of order at some point with the proper name. It's too much pressure for me.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. Councilmember Gibson?
Just wanted to announce that the Tacoma Truck Garden, which is a beer fest with food that's this Saturday, June 1st, noon to 5 at the Co-op parking lot. That should be fun. And then I wanted to thank both, all three of actually the public speakers tonight, or the public, particularly with regard to traffic calming and sidewalks, Jessica Landman and David Reed. Thank you both for your comments. I think that we deserve that. Those regulations deserve more attention. It certainly is a strong effort, but it does deserve more attention along the lines that you both pointed out. And Jessica, in particular, I read through your notes with 8 separate recommendations, and I think each one of those needs to be looked at. There may be answers quickly for some, and others we may need to change our regulations. I want to thank you. And also I want to thank Emily for the point about the surveillance camera. I have been in discussion with her as well as with the police department, but I think additional information is needed, and perhaps as she suggested, that some notice, additional communication and follow-up, I think would be appropriate. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilmember Gibson. Councilmember DeBala?
Yeah, just very briefly, wanted to say congratulations to all of the Blair High School graduates and all the other schools that graduate, are about to start graduating students, and to the parents, because it takes parents to get kids through school. And of course, the crossing guards, because y'all remember when they were little. And that really is all I had to say tonight. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mayor, point of order. Her name was Dorothy Michaels.
Dorothy Michaels, thank you so much, Councilmember Small. Councilmember Fulcher.
Thank you. I also want to congratulate Blair class of 2024. I've joined some of my colleagues in having a child make it through high school, and a sincere thank you to the crossing guards for helping my kids cross the streets. I really appreciate you. And thank you everybody who came to give public comment. I took a lot of notes on what you were bringing up. I will be busy on Saturday at the blood drive happening here in the community center, at the truck garden, and since Kara's not here to mention it, the Flower Avenue Block Party on Saturday from 2 to 5 p.m. I will be there as well. And then also thank you to Historic Tacoma for extending us the invitation to stop in for happy hour on Friday. I intend to stop in there on my way to another graduates party. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Fulcher. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to share my observation of the crossing guards. I've been knowing and watching crossing guards for many years here in Tacoma Park, and they are the most caring and loving people that I think any of our kids ever come in contact with. They're really super. They don't not just out there telling drivers what to do and what not to do, but they're telling the kids how to stay safe and a little bit of what not to do too. But they're to be a crossing guard in Tacoma Park, you have to have the right heart, and to the person, we have people with the right heart being our crossing guards, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. And I'm just going to keep pouring. And I'm just going to keep pouring on the love to our crossing guards, because why not? I think a lot of people, to the point that was in the proclamation, a lot of people just see you all as a barrier, and I see you as a savior. You're making sure that our kids are able to get to school safely. And I think a lot of people don't fully understand how many little ones we have on bikes and scooters and walking and navigating, as we've heard in other parts of the conversation today already, streets that are heavily trafficked. And so we have a lot of people who are cutting through our community. So it's even more vital than ever that we have people who really have a heart to serve. So thank you so much. So I'm going to be busy. I'm going to be honest. It's a lot going on. One thing I do want to give a special shout out on, what day was that? That was Friday. Last Friday, I had an opportunity to, Councilmember Fulcher was there, Piney Branch Elementary, was it Thursday? I have no concept of time at this point. Thank you. Last Thursday, Carpe Diem Arts, Ukes on the Move, they get a Tacoma Park grant, and they actually provide ukuleles to the fourth graders at Piney Branch Elementary School. I had the opportunity to watch the concert. And so I did not know how many Taylor Swift fans were fourth graders, but there are a lot of them. And but it was really, really, really great to not only see the kids, but to see them being able to enjoy the ukuleles. And it just reminded me of how vital our community grants programs are to making sure that these kinds of opportunities exist in our community. So what's going on next? So this week there's a lot. So on Friday, I will try to make it to the happy hour for Historic Tacoma, to make sure that I'm there for that, and that's on Friday. On Saturday, the 1st, there's a lot. I'm gonna have to like pace this appropriately. So I'm speaking at the Bright Light Baptist Church. They're welcoming their new pastor. I should probably do that before the truck garden. So we'll do Bright Light Baptist Church in the morning. Probably should do blood next, before the beer, and then close it out with the Flower Avenue Together block party. So there's a lot of wonderful things that are happening in Tacoma Park this weekend. So hope that folks can get out and enjoy. And then lastly, in terms of comments this evening, I want to thank everyone for providing comments, making us aware of different upcoming events, and sharing thoughts regarding our traffic calming regulations. It's really helpful for us to hear this feedback, and definitely look forward to hearing many more as we go through and finalize this process. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our city manager, Mr. DeSpirito, to provide city manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council, and our guests. From the city clerk's office, the deadline to apply for appointment to city boards and committees has been extended to Monday, June 10th. Please check our website for complete information about vacancies and how to apply. The Youth Council's I Voted sticker design contest has also been extended. The deadline for submissions is now Wednesday, June 5th. Residents who are 18 years old and younger are welcome to submit designs for an I Voted sticker to be used for the city's 2024 election for mayor and city council. Instructions for the design and application form are available on the city website. Links will be included tomorrow in the posted city manager comments as well. From the communications department, the Hometown Media Awards, organized annually by the Alliance for Community Media, celebrate and promote community media, community radio, and local cable programs distributed on public, educational, and governmental access cable television channels. We are thrilled to announce that City TV has been awarded first place in the 2024 Hometown Media Awards competition. City TV received the prestigious Overall Excellence in Governmental Access Award from them in the $300,000 to $650,000 budget division. This award recognizes the outstanding operational activities and programming efforts of access organizations. This year, City TV's submission featured over 20 projects and programs. The Hometown Media Awards honor and promote creative programs that address community needs, foster diverse community involvement, and reflect the lives of residents from various backgrounds. These awards also aim to offer viewers a unique television experience. Alvaro Calabia, City TV production manager, said, "We produce programs that represent the events and activities of the city, showcasing the character of Tacoma Park. We are not just Tacoma Park Television, we are Tacoma Park on television." In addition to the Overall Excellence Award, City TV was recognized for its outstanding children's programming with our submission of the Tacoma Park Children's Business Fair. We are so honored to be recognized in this category, as we do love to showcase our children as a vital resource in our community. From the Housing and Community Development Department, we are proud to announce that Casey Ann Webley and Maisa Bateman have been named to the America Walks 2024 National Walking College Fellowship Class. The Walking College is an online educational program geared toward early to middle stage advocates eager to organize in communities to expand access to walkable, vibrant, safe, and accessible places. In its 9th year, the Walking College welcomes 25 impressive candidates. A link to this website will be included in tomorrow's comments with posted biographies of all of the participants. This Friday, May 31st at 7:30 p.m. in the Community Center Auditorium here. Please join us for the Capitol Hillbillies. They will raise the roof with a rousing mix of barrel house blues and jug band music from the 1920s and 30s. Don't miss it. This is a free event. And finally, from the City Manager's office, a staff shout out. The Housing and Community Development Department would like to shout out Jean Kerr and Mariama Karoma for their tireless work promoting the May 21st Tenant Forum. They spent the week leading up to the event ensuring that flyers reached our 4 to 6 unit buildings in wards 5 and 6. Mariama then did a terrific job helping with setup, directing residents, and presenting on the resources available in the city and county. And Jean's presentation was such a wealth of information, supported by her many years of work for the city, that there were few questions left to ask during the question and answer time. So again, we congratulate these two terrific employees and very proud of you both. That concludes my report this evening, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And one last thing, given that Councilmember Honzak is unable to attend tonight's meeting, we also had an opportunity, and I want to thank Washington Adventist University President Dr. Spence, as well as the Purple School and healing counseling. We came together, the students at the Purple School, Councilmember DePaula was there, and the city manager. The kids came together and planted lots of pots for people in the community, and there were a couple of flowers that were provided to Dr. Spence and the folks at the university. So really appreciative of Councilmember Honzak organizing that gathering, and definitely will be looking forward to the event next Saturday, or this Saturday. I think it's this Saturday, June 1st. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to our voting
I
session.
have a question.
Yes, Councilmember Sloan.
City Manager Spirito, I was curious if you could outline what you think the touch points of response from the State Highway Administration will be with your staff in follow-up from the meeting. It doesn't necessarily matter as much what the touch points are with me or my tire that they broke, but as far as the long term, I would be curious to know what where you guys are.
Thank you for the question. As you all recall, just at your last meeting with Administrator William Pines and also Derek Gunn, the District 3 District Engineer, I had an opportunity to speak with them following their participation with us, and particularly with Mr. Gunn, because he's been the one that we've been meeting with, and staff has been meeting in recent meetings, virtual meetings we've had with SHA. They mentioned with respect to, well, they're going to get back to us, of course. They heard a lot from us. They indicated that it would be a matter of weeks that they would begin to get information back on a lot of questions that were asked. Very specifically to the intersection at Carroll and Philadelphia, I was told that it's this week, this current week, that they were going to have a team of their staff visit the site, take measurements, and do other, I guess, analysis of the situation as it was portrayed to them. And we've been feeding a lot of information to them, including I've been passing along videos and emails that have come from our residents directly to Mr. Gunn saying, you know, this should be useful to you. With respect to what's going on with University and the Purple Line, I think they did hear from the Mayor and Council a lot of significant concerns about congestion, certainly our desire to get 2 additional red light cameras permitted by SHA at that location. We have followed that up with correspondence to them, and we are awaiting an answer. But as soon as I've got something, I'll be happy to share that immediately with the Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Robert. I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate the fact that that we know that there are people on the staff that could follow up with people and promote this accountability in state agencies. I was saying before that it's kind of like state highway is like a bad boyfriend or a bad girlfriend where you always defend them to other people because you don't want to mess up the relationship that you have with them. But at some point you gotta break the cycle. And so I appreciate the efforts that you guys are gonna make on behalf of that. So thank you.
Thank you. My staff at a number of different levels, and they're following up with their peers as well. I know that Daryl and her staff, the chief and his staff, with respect whether it's red light cameras or whether it's traffic issues, they've been having their own conversations in addition to ones that I've been having. So
and
it is a team effort on our part.
Yeah, and I just wanted to conclude that thought with the thing that I said during the meeting, and I wanted to highlight it, in that I don't like the fact that people who aren't accountable necessarily make our staff get jammed up because people want answers, and people ask me about things, and I'm sure they ask other people, and it's not fair to them to have to not know. So I appreciate all of your efforts.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. And just as an FYI for colleagues, the presentation that we had that noted our priorities for SHA was also communicated to our District 20 delegation today. No worries. All right, so we're going to move to the first voting item this evening. The first item is a resolution establishing policy objectives associated with fiscal year 2026 budget. Would someone like to move the, thank you, Councilmember DeBala. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Small. So we do want to open this one up a little bit for discussion, just so that everyone is on the same page in terms of some of the edits that were made. Just as a quick reminder, the 7th whereas clause was edited to was no worries, you have to count these whereases. Was edited based on feedback that we had received from the working group regarding clarification around what it was that they covered during the group. And then the second resolve clause was clarified because there was a request by members of the working group to make sure that not just the report, but the supplemental information that had been gathered throughout the course of the working group is also conveyed to staff. In the third whereas clause was clarified based on the conversation that happened during the last council meeting, particularly as it pertains to public engagement. So the language now reads, multifaceted opportunities for pre-budget public engagement, to make it clear that there are multiple ways in which we may engage with the community. The additional whereas clauses, I'm losing my count, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth resolve clause was edited to try to clarify a little bit more in terms of what it is that we're looking for staff to do as it pertains to these two policies that we have. So the first now reads, updating the equipment replacement reserve policy to establish a goal for the minimum number of years the city reserve should aim to fund and the strategy for reaching the funding goal. So this is more around how do we make sure we're reviewing our current policies with the eye in mind of funding and making sure that either the minimum number of years that should be covered under the equipment replacement reserve, and ensuring whether or not we need to make sure that we have a standing policy regarding the amount of funds that we want to make sure that we contribute to the reserve. And the second is reevaluating road maintenance policy. And again, this is based on the fact that our road maintenance policies are a little dated, could benefit from us reviewing them again. The last whereas clause was updated to clarify, and this is something that Councilmember Honzak and others communicated. We want to make sure that we're not doing a complete review of fees to ensure that they're cost neutral, because there are some services that we provide, like our recreation department services, where, you know, we want to provide the service regardless of whether or not we can generate the revenues necessary to cover the costs. So that the language now reads city fees to ensure the revenues cover the estimated cost of service delivery where desirable, considering equity impacts. And then lastly, the second bullet under that last whereas just kind of clarifies that we're talking about stormwater fund fees to fund additional staff capacities or resources to assist the city in its expansion of flood management efforts. And then the final item regarding tax duplication, parks, was left out, and that was included. So again, the goal of this resolution is to set the framework for the different components of the budgeting process that the council would like to see start to happen, identify those places where there may need to be discussions earlier in the process in order to equip the council during the budget session with the ability to weigh costs, pros and cons of different things like a stormwater fee, different tax options. For some of these items that's listed in this resolution, if we don't start early, then we're not going to be able to have the answers to the questions that we need during budget season. Are there any questions or comments, Councilmember Small?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to make sure that, from what I thought I heard you say, that the further resolved, which I guess would be the second of the resolves, actually says what you intended it to say. Because I thought you just said that you wanted the staff to review all of the information provided by the council working group just now. But this says that the city council will do that. And so if you wanted it to say that the staff is supposed to do that, it doesn't say that. It doesn't. It says, resolve that the city council working closely with the city manager will review and report the supplemental information provided by the council working group. But that's just us looking at stuff. So I thought what you said was you wanted the staff to look at that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's right, Councilmember Small. The resolve clause that superseded that, the council working closely with the, no, that's, and then the next one includes the city manager and designated staff to refine. Nope, what's here is correct, I misspoke. So this is because so because the council working group, we never did for some of the recommendations that were made, we never made a clear direction to council regarding those items. So those are some things that may have to be with us to give a decision about before before the staff can take action, if that makes sense.
All right, I get it. All right, that makes sense.
Any other questions or comments before we vote? Councilmember DeBala?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify two things. One is, last week we had a big discussion about vehicles and replacement policies and so forth, and I just wanted to confirm my understanding from all of that was that when we do this, we'll talk about the report that the working group makes. We'll talk about those issues then, and we'll hear the work that's been done on that topic, of which I at least wasn't aware, at that point, rather than have it be a separate section like it was last week. So just confirming that it didn't disappear; it's just been merged into it. It's going to be addressed a different way. Yes.
I'm
thought
sorry,
it
I
was
thought,
to the working
I'm
group.
sorry, I thought you were looking at Councilmember Gibson, to the folks that were in the working group.
Who you talking to? Because I didn't know who you were talking to. Because
No, I think,
Did the
no.
group meet?
So just to, no worries, just to clarify, no worries. So just for the folks, I believe Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Fulcher, and Councilmember Gibson were a part of the working group. There were items that were included in the report that you all provided, some of which required council to decide on, because I think that there were some points that you all were locked in. And so because of that, the council needs to do a follow-up to your report so that we can be in a better place to provide direction to them regarding certain things like, I think the equipment replacement reserve and the vehicle policy was something that there was a little bit of we need to come back as a council to discuss because there wasn't consensus within the working group. And so because of that, those kinds of things, the council needs to follow up on, and then we'll make a decision. But in terms of the reserve, one of the things that's really important for us to make sure of, which was talked about, was about making sure that we have, that there's enough monies in the reserves, right? So is it the case that we want to make sure that we have a funding goal for the reserves that's a little bit more clearly communicated, especially as we talk about things like electrifying our fleet and making sure that we have the right charging infrastructure and those kinds of things. So there's two different components, and I think Councilmember DeBala, that's what you're mentioning. There's two different components. We still have to do our due diligence to follow up on the working group and make final decisions on that, while simultaneously encouraging our staff to help prepare materials around the overall costs that are associated with ERR, whether or not we're funding it properly so that we're in a better place when it comes time to vote on the budget with all of that information ready to go. And I see a lot of lights. Councilmember DeBala, did you have a?
Yes, I did have just one more point. So I had a conversation with a resident about this last bullet, the tax duplication. And she asked whether, as part of working together over the next 8 months, we would at some point check in publicly with, so the residents could hear what we're doing. I don't feel a need to put it in the resolution, but I just want to make sure that we do that we don't just let it go 8 months, but we bring it up at some point, let residents know what's going on with tax duplication in particular.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilman. Oh, that was directed to me. All right. I think that is something that we can do. I know that we could speak explicitly about what's going on with the city of Tacoma Parks, trying to address current tax dupe issues, because there's meetings that are happening in terms of that. I think that in terms of what may be happening from an MML perspective, depending on how that cadence works, I think there's a subgroup that they're looking for folks to form so that we could start working on the county, some revisions to the formula that we want to have clearly communicated in the county bill that established the tax dupe formula. So I think that we can at least give people, may not be a lot from the MML perspective, other than we're just forming a group and we're trying to work through it. But I think that we can provide folks with an update in terms of the status of our own tax dupe. Sure. Councilmember Gibson.
I was going to handle a different issue unless Shana wanted to respond to what Cindy's point was.
Okay. I think we're good.
Yeah, I just wanted to make note of the very first now therefore. We'll continue to review revenues, expenditures, reserves. And so whereas while we do not specify later on what we will be doing with regard to expenditures and efficiencies there, I just want to hold up that's not outside of our purview. In other words, we will continue to look at expenditures and ways to reduce expenditures. And in that, but I don't need to add anything more. I do have a kind of a friendly amendment having again to do with funding, and that is the second whereas, where we talk about the city is recovering from fiscal and other impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I wanted to just put in an ARPA drawdown, funding drawdown, just because both of those factors, the COVID itself as well as ARPA, were major impacts on how we do business. So I don't know what, that's a friendly amendment or a request here, that, where it says impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and ARPA funding drawdown, I'm not sure of the right terminology.
Sure. Council, can I
As
make a
second,
friendly
I think I
amendment?
can accept that, I think.
Can I make a friendly amendment to your amendment?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The city is recovering from the fiscal and other impacts of COVID, as well as the expiration of ARPA funds.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
I'll accept that for the
Yeah.
purposes of the dealing up in the order.
It's certainly obviously has been and will continue to be important for our fiscal sustainability to make up or address that. Thank you.
Good point. Councilmember Fulcher?
Thank you. I guess I had a couple quick questions. So, I feel like the working group got to a point where they were making the recommendation that the council should consider directing staff to evaluate where their fees are, but that needed to be, that wasn't a power that we as a 3-person working group had the ability to decide that was a direction that we wanted to go in. And so I feel like that was already recommended by the working group, that is what the council should consider. Whether we need a resolution to do that, or whether that's just a thing that we're gonna ask the city manager, like, hey, could you direct staff to do this? I don't have strong feelings about that one way or the other. But I just don't know that, I guess it's fine to keep on putting in like another resolution this year. It just feels like we already did that.
I'd
Yeah,
like to
from a
support her point. I think because I don't necessarily see this resolution as having said any of the toothy things that we just talked about up here, or that the people on the committee said that they were sort of looking for. Like, it's sort of in there, but it doesn't, it's just, I don't know. I feel like that there are all of the words, but what is on here and what you guys seem to be discussing doesn't necessarily match up. And I would point out that if we're talking about budget calendar and doing a good job of giving people the opportunity to onboard, that is one thing. But it says in here something about refine the calendar, develop a forecast, establish the goals, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, we're officially updating the replacement reserve policy and reevaluating road maintenance. But we're doing that. But then we were talking about them sort of at first. And I'm not trying to be difficult about it. I just don't think that I just think it's too indelicate from what you actually said about what this should say. Does that make sense?
Right. So I want to just make sure that we kind of take a step back and remind everyone of like what this is and why this exists. So for the 2025 budget, we had a resolution around the calendar and what we wanted for 25. That doesn't exist for 26. So we needed to try to do that. There were things that came up during the budget process, such as the utility and railroad taxes, such as questions around vacant properties. These are things that, and vacant property taxes, these are things that came up during the budgeting process that we could not answer because those things take time to investigate, and there requires a council decision in order to move forward on anything associated with those things. So we needed to try to figure out some way to solidify that those are things we really, as a council, want staff to investigate. Then we also have the outstanding recommendations or the outstanding items from the working group that, Councilmember Fulcher asked the question of, do we need to do it in a resolution? The short answer is yes, we do. From a procedural perspective, the subcommittee can't direct staff. The council can. So that means that we have to go through the recommendations that the subcommittee, the working group put together. We, as a council, would need to develop a resolution for we may need to have a work session. If there are things where there was some disagreement, then we have to develop a resolution to direct staff in terms of how we want to implement the aspects of the recommendations that the working group had put forward. So all of that we're trying to account for all of those different pieces in this.
Yeah. I guess I would say that to some degree, I feel like that sort of makes the point, because it's a pretty big volume of stuff that we are trying to concretize with a lot of like non-explicit things, like reevaluating and updating, and like those are good words and they're hopeful words, but I personally found what you just said just now as to what we're doing for this resolution to make more sense to me than reading this did. And I don't know if we could pull it back and you could, like some of the things could maybe come out so it reads more directly that we're directing the council to have a decision about what the committee said, and then that will be a direction to the staff. Because, like, just procedurally, I get what you were saying. I just want it to look like that better, is what I guess what I'm saying. If that makes sense. Like, it doesn't have to make sense, but that's my thought about it. Like, I feel like you could put some more, like, action in verbs.
Councilmember DeBala.
Is it, I was just about to ask, is it things like the city council will work with the city manager and staff, and you would prefer it to be more specific?
Well, yeah. Because,
Is that the, no, I'm just trying to understand, so that.
Yes,
yeah.
my answer is yes,
Yes.
because I wouldn't want people to, I would like, if I was them, I would like to know what it is that they are going to be asked to do. And so it could just say that, is what I thought. That's my point, Cindy.
So the city council, so for, yeah, so that be it further resolved that the city manager will return to the council within 8 months to continue the reviews.
I mean, because if
Something
it
more
just
like
says that, then everybody knows they can put it on a calendar. It just seems more normal to me. And again, I don't mean to be a sticky wicket here, but I do think that I'm concerned about us setting up a situation where we're putting undue budgetary pressure on people who already have to figure out how to come up with a budget. And so I would like to make sure that they know what it is that our group is asking of them going forward, because we are in a transitional phase to whatever we're going to do next. That's my argument for why I think it should just be tighter.
I see Deputy City Manager Bodak has his light.
Yeah, I guess to a similar point, from a staff clarity and staff clear direction standpoint, just understanding what the next step is, because I think I got a little bit confused with the discussion, whether or not the next step is, a work session with council to go over the recommendations from the finance work group, or is staff also being directed to do things kind of concurrent with that, or to provide perhaps additional insights that might help inform council during that work session? It's just, I guess, understanding what that order of operations is would be helpful.
Okay, Councilmember Fulcher.
I guess my concern is that this resolution just looks so similar to the one that we passed last year. And I feel like, the next step is to further look into the work that's already been done, or, no, I guess it's to take action on some of the recommendations that were made, right? Like directing staff departments to evaluate their fees. And, you know, from how some of this is written, like, it concerns me that that's not really something, like, it's not my job to figure out like what the rate should be for Public Works. Like, we would hope that the Director of Public Works would be in charge of figuring that out. And same thing with HCD stuff, that I'm not looking to get into their jobs. You know, I want to empower them to do the thing that we're asking them to do. And then, you know, maybe with the railroad and utility tax, you know, just an explanation of what it would look like for us to raise that tax is what we're looking for, right? Like some actual numbers to go with these things. And then, you know, once again, the vacant property, we were told that that's just not a place where we're going to make any revenue. We can do it, but it's not going to be a significant source of revenue, and that's not, expectation of revenue is not necessarily the only reason why you would do some of these things, but from like a strictly revenue point of view, that's not going to earn the city very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulcher. Councilmember DeBala?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I just,
Councilmember Gibson?
I wonder, I hear the need for a next step. Is one next step designate a working group to flesh out kind of the same things that Shane had talked about, in terms of which things need to be further clarified for staff and which things need to be brought back to the council for some direction.
I would disagree that that's the, you know, I think,
possibilities.
I think the first step is making sure that, so if folks want to have a little bit more time with this resolution to make additional edits, we can pull it back, but I need edits. So if there are aspects of the resolution that needs to be clarified or further spelled out, we can give the council another week with this. You could send your edits forward and we can edit it. But I think that, you know, in terms of trying to move this forward, this conversation has been helpful, but what we really need, particularly from the folks that participated on the working group, are edits. So if there are certain aspects of this that would be more beneficial to be more explicitly called out, then that would, you know, if we could get those edits from you, then that is something that we can try to make sure that we incorporate in time to bring this back before council. Councilmember Siemens?
Yes, I think that sounds good. I think that what I would like to see is that there were certain kind of recommendations that the subcommittee made, and that this resolution should say, yes, those should be moved forward, or we should get feedback from the staff and then implement something for those. And that leaves us down to a small handful of other things that where there were not, where it appeared there still need some additional work. And part of that is the equipment replacement reserve would be one example. The street maintenance was another example. That there were certain things that you mentioned some this evening that still remain, questions that remain that maybe should be looked at more deeply, and that we should ask the city manager to come back with staff input on those things so that we can make decisions that are appropriate for the council to be making on how what we want to see and what our policy is on those items. And then there's also the question of metrics that is was not really done by the subcommittee, but is something that has lingered after our work. And again, I would think that we should be seeking staff input on that so that we can feel comfortable that we're headed in the right direction. And it's something that the city manager feels comfortable that could be accomplished. And whether or not we actually approve that or just wave and say thank you for settling our minds on that particular topic.
Yeah, and I think we discussed metrics during the last discussion, the work session on this item, in large part, just simply put the timing associated with when we would get contracts up, measures developed, people to actually start reporting data in order to be able to report them as part of the budget. So that was an item that was mentioned by Councilmember Gibson for inclusion, but because we're talking about the 26 budget, that was something that was going to be, from a timing perspective, a little bit difficult to do. City Manager DeSpirito?
Yes, thank you, and my staff and I appreciate these comments. I think if we were to be asked what would be helpful to us with respect to, should it be Mayor and Council's ultimate desire to further refine this, is maybe more clarity around goals, a more clarity around goals versus a focus on, say, the methods, means and methods that staff would employ to do an analysis. I think those are things that you could have some confidence that we would be able to do. But I think there are some areas that you know, if you wish to further improve this, that perhaps, again, some group think about what it really is that the mayor and council wish to achieve or wish staff to achieve for you would be the emphasis. With respect to the metrics and performance measurement, of course, I think staff has great clarity about that because you've respectfully approved the request that city staff included in the FY25 budget proposal, and you've adopted a new FY26 budget, and you've got or FY25 budget, so you've got direction to council already. We're already beginning to have conversations staff side about preparing the RFP, and ultimately there's a whole process that will play out. I don't think, you know, to be honest, unless you wish to provide it, that we at this stage need any additional feedback from council or conversation around metrics, because now the onus is on us to begin to get that ball rolling for you, okay? And we will come at various stages with things for you to review and react to and give us feedback on, you know, long before anything's fully implemented. So I think that's on a good track. But again, with respect to this resolution, I think that there's a number of areas that we discussed during the budget, like the road policy, like the ERR, that staff frankly provided a tremendous amount of information during the budget process and tried to answer any and all questions when they arose. If there's still some questions that haven't yet been asked or some answers that were not satisfying, then of course we would be glad to further engage with you in some conversation. But I think you know, a lot of, you know, the ERR and the criteria, you know, have been looked at and refined and validated from staff's perspective a number of times. The road policy, road evaluation, road maintenance policy is also what we consider to be a sound policy, but one that hasn't been what was initially using criteria that was adopted a number of years ago, and we're having some internal discussion staff side about whether, you know, that it would be prudent to update that. But I think that there's, you know, we certainly understand your areas of interest here, and I think we can run with a lot of this even as is. But if you desire to do more, then I would say respectfully that more clarity around your goals for us in terms of work that you wish us to do would be what I would respectfully ask you to focus on.
Councilmember Fulcher?
Just going back to the equipment replacement reserve policy, I think that we were less at a point of how we're evaluating those vehicles, and more, are we actually preparing for electrification, which the answer is no, right? We're not putting enough money into that. And so what does it look like in order to be properly funding the ERR for the future that we're planning for?
More of a financial discussion, right?
Right.
Than a criteria
Yes.
for the policy discussion. Yeah,
And
you're correct.
you can see that
Totally
it's
say
crossed
that.
out here.
I feel like it could easily say that.
Councilmember Small, you haven't been acknowledged. Thank you. Councilmember Fulcher?
And then I think that the thing that I'm having a hard time with is that when I look at this, it doesn't really reflect the memo that came out of the working group, and I'm happy to work on this and have it better reflect that, and then also try to work on the clarity of goals rather than the methods as per asked by the city manager.
So it sounds to me that what folks are really seeking is that follow-up work session on the working group's report.
We looked at the memo as a city council, but then we didn't actually talk about the memo after looking at the memo, and so I feel like that's the step that we're missing.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe the next step would be to pull this resolution back, retable it, add a work session. I just want to make sure that the working group will be ready to, we can talk offline, but being ready to facilitate a work session where we can do that deeper dive into your report. And then bring this back. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna look to Jesse to make sure procedurally what I gotta do. Because we moved this.
Just, yeah, move to a indefinite date, to table
Okay.
to an indefinite date.
Right. I move to table this item. And thank you very much. So we'll mark this because we'll have the work session on the committees.
Could,
Okay, Councilmember Gibson.
yeah, so I understand the tabling, I understand that you would like, or you're asking the council whether we would like that the three-person working group reconvene or am I?
Well, reconvene for the purpose
For the,
of
I was gonna say,
the work
let me
session.
finish, yeah. For the purpose of clarifying next steps and what had been determined in that working group to go forward or not.
No, what I'm saying is when we had the work session where we went through your report, it was very late and it was just really brief. And so what we're looking for is a work session where we have your report and we're just walking through as a council to make decisions, even if it means hand votes around these are the recommendations we agreed upon. Are there any thoughts or concerns with moving forward with those recommendations? And
So
then
the
we're-
work session is
the entire
the entire
council.
council.
Correct.
With input from the work group in particular.
Correct.
Okay.
Because we need the entire council to say, in a majority of council to vote in approval of moving forward with any of the recommendations that were proposed.
That makes sense. I will say that we kind of forced ourselves at the very end, our work group, to move something quickly because it was the end of the year, end of the time frame that we had to do that it might have been, some clarity would be helpful. I think it was forced in a way that maybe wasn't as clear as it could be. And so I'm comfortable with our reviewing it.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be helpful too to have more folks a part of the discussion that might kind of add some clarity. So I think that there were some places where maybe there was disagreement, and so bringing it to the larger council may help to kind of bring those points to rest.
I had no disagreement.
I call a question on the table. On the tabling.
Thanks.
I'm
All
pro
those
tabling.
all those in favor of tabling this until after we have the work session on the recommendations from the budget working group.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you.
Next item is a resolution approving the submission of the 2025 legislative action request to MML. Would
So
someone like
moved.
to move it? Thank you, Councilmember Small. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councilmember Fulcher. So this, I'm going to quickly read the legislative action request just for my colleagues that weren't able to participate in the Montgomery County Maryland Municipal League meeting that was held most recently. One of the things that we discussed was maybe working collaboratively across municipalities within Montgomery County to put forward LARs that we all agree are things that we want to see fixed as a way to really try to push to make sure that those items ultimately make it up the chain in MML. So the first item, the council urges MML to continue efforts to protect highway user revenues for municipalities and to initiate and support legislation to provide additional revenue authority for municipalities, is something that everyone agreed that highway user revenues were on the bubble this session, and we want to make sure that MML is protecting those highway user revenues. The second item, the council urges MML to initiate or support legislation to require SHA to pay for sidewalk infrastructure along state highways, including utility relocation. MML should also support SHA implementing safety standards for safer and walkable communities, including expanding automatic enforcement tools, so stop sign cameras. So the first part was something that the Montgomery County MML agreed we want to try to push to try to get SHA to start paying for some of the infrastructure. And we heard from Administrator Pines that, hey, we don't have the money. It's be hard. Well, we got to push it. And then the second item was something that MML actually did support the last cycle around stop sign cameras or automatic enforcement tools for SHA. Now, the last item, if folks recall during our last meeting, there were two topics that were up for discussion. One was around climate change and the other was around youth. And so one of the things that Ann brought up was the possibility of really focusing on mental health and substance use services and ways in which we may be able to do something to support youth. So the last item is the council urges MML to support legislation to increase mental health and substance use services to youth. Efforts may include increasing behavioral health service capacity within schools, as well as funding for wraparound youth programming, including recreation services and infrastructure. And the last is, it's not an LAR. It is, be it further resolved that the council of the city of Tacoma Park also urges MML to track legislation designed to advance the state's clean energy goals. So we're not asking this as an LAR. We're just saying, hey, take a look at it and monitor it. So are there any points of discussion for this one? Councilmember DeBala?
Yeah, two things. One on the second, the one about SHA, including utility relocation. The issue with utility relocation is municipalities not having to pay for it, not necessarily SHA paying for it, as opposed to the utilities or the developer or somebody else. So I'm not sure if that's exactly right. This is referring to a bill that was introduced this past session, requiring utility relocation, timely utility relocation on SHA projects, and MML didn't like it because it suggested that municipalities would have to pay the cost of utility relocation in their locations, in their cities. And there's certainly a way to do that without opposing the bill altogether. But I'm not sure if that's exactly right. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You've read the bill, you know what I'm talking about. Did we get that right?
Okay, let me see.
To pay for sidewalk infrastructure.
State
Because
highways.
the utility relocation is not just about sidewalks, it's about roads, construction generally.
Okay, we'll pull that, okay, let's move to the next slide.
Yeah,
and then
I'll
I
think of
will-
something, and then the second thing was just to explain that in not last year, but in previous years, the city has recommended that MML track something because we didn't think they were gonna embrace it as a push, and then the next year they'd be ready to actually support specific legislation. So that's why this is put this way. There is no specific legislation yet, and it's a new area for MML. So the thought was to say, they track what's going on, they participate in what's going on, they don't have to take a position, they just have to be in the room. And last year we didn't do this. I'm not sure if the year before we did it, but we have done it in previous years with good result. So that's the thought there. Just wanted to explain that.
Thanks, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Gibson?
So, excuse me, Cindy, you were saying that the clean energy is the one that would be, that had not been tracked or had not been pushed? Is that, I'm just trying to understand, by MML?
It's an issue that MML has not worked on.
Has not worked on, okay.
Yeah. They did finally get into the climate game generally, but clean energy legislation, no.
So,
There was a year when they were tracking climate legislation and just watching, and then the next year they were ready to endorse particular bills. So trying the same technique, that's all.
right, I guess, the question is if that should, whether we should broaden that, because we had spoken about stormwater issues, and I have been to MML meetings where stormwater came up regularly. Is that something that MML does track, and so we don't need to mention it? Or is that, I'm just kind of looking at our climate environmental
Right.
portfolio and holding up one versus another and trying to understand the rationale.
Well, so I made a few phone calls to different people over the last couple of weeks, and I didn't find anybody who was talking about doing stormwater legislation next year. And I did find folks who were talking about clean energy legislation, and that's why I
So
had it
there's a
this
point
way.
of leverage here.
That's my thought, yes.
And two, last, when our lobbyist was here and the materials that she provided, where she walked through all of the bills that passed, you saw that there were some pretty massive bills that passed. It was a stormwater, there was a flood mitigation bill that passed. So part of it is after coming off of a pretty substantial session where there's a lot of things that passed, you kind of want to give it some time to see how's it going and before we kind of hit them over the head again. So I think that was another reason why, policies like related to housing or related to certain aspects of climate, because they were hit so hard this session, we may just want to give it a year of a reprieve. Councilmember Small?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I actually think this is a really well drafted at a base level. And the move from the second paragraph to the third paragraph stands that up, but at the same time, moving the further resolve to where it is makes it a larger and more general priority at the same time. So I actually think this one looks really cool as far as they go. Yeah, for being a nerd about such things.
Thanks so much. All right, so let's just do a quick, I'm sorry, y'all, I hate writing at the dais, but let's try to tweak this language. To pay for infrastructure along state highways, period. MML.
Should consider amendments to SHA bills that
Consider
utility
Mm-hmm.
That's very specific.
Bills related to utility. Okay, so we'll give this to you, Jesse, I promise. But I'll read it just so that everybody is good with it. We're just putting that utility relocation into a separate sentence. So the council urges MML to initiate and support legislation to require SHA to pay for sidewalk infrastructure along state highways. MML should consider bills related to utility relocation along state roads. MML should also support SHA implementing safety standards for safer and walkable communities, including expanding automatic enforcement tools. So we're just clarifying that we're not talking about SHA paying, because I know the utility companies and everybody is involved too. Okay, and we can send that to you in writing. Okay, so I don't think I did that right at all in terms of that amendment, but I'm going to take it as a friendly amendment, right? All right. So I think we're ready for a vote. This thing has been moved. It has been seconded. All right. So well, first I guess I should vote on the amended. Well, I'm treating it as a friendly amendment.
It's pretty friendly.
I think so. Okay, awesome.
Well, whoever had the second could just say that that's cool with it.
Did I? Yes, I love your friendly
Thank you.
amendment.
Thank you very much. All right. All those in favor of the resolution authorizing transmittal of legislative action requests to the Maryland Municipal League for consideration, please say aye. Aye. Do we have any opposed? Any abstain? All right.
Okay.
All right. So the next item is a resolution appointing resident members to the Police Employees Retirement Plan Committee. Would someone like to move?
Moved.
Thank you, Councilmember
Second.
DeBala for moving. Thank you, Councilmember Fulcher for seconding. All right, are there any questions or comments on this one? Just for folks' awareness, we have two vacant slots on this committee, and we have two residents that have volunteered to serve on this committee. Councilmember Gibson's like first.
Just a question, there's two members out of how many are in the committee altogether? Oh, 7, I'm sorry. And so there's been some vacancy for some time. Is that, has that been weeks or months or years?
Sometime, City
It has
Clerk.
been, we had advertised for a good length of time, months and months and months to
Okay.
find people. This is a different kind of
Can I
committee.
speak to this?
It meets during the day. It's not a resident committee, but
Yeah.
it's the committee that has 2 resident representatives on it.
All right. Well, thank you for getting some folks then.
Councilmember Fulcher.
Yeah, I mean, just one of the things that comes from having a city clerk who's so in tune with everything going on in the city. She was like, I think that Peter Munger would be interested in applying for this. Can you go over to his house and knock on his door and get his email address and phone number? And so I went and did that. And so that is somehow how the sausage is made, is by having staff that really knows our community and knows who might be likely to step up for something like this. So that's how that position, became to be filled after many months of it being empty.
Councilmember Small.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the efforts of the staff and the committee on getting all of those appointments filled. But I would like to register and reiterate that I hope that at some point during this year, we're going to look at the pension program vis-a-vis the state pension system and see whether or not we're getting the best bang for our buck. As an incentive, both for officers and or the actual manipulation of finances.
All right, seeing no more lights. All those in favor of the resident appointments to the Police Committee's Retirement Plan Committee, please say aye. Aye. Do you have any opposed? Any abstain? All right. Okay. We will have a 10-minute break. All right, before we move into our work sessions. All right. Thank you all so much. All right, we're going to reconvene our meeting tonight with the first work session, the administrative regulations addressing processes to request, evaluate, and advance traffic calming on sidewalk installations. And we are joined by our planning manager, Ms. Grisby, who's going to walk us through the presentation.
Good evening. I'm Rosalind Grigsby, Community Development Manager for the city. Yes, tonight's topic is the administrative regulations to update traffic calming and new sidewalks. I wanted to start with Council Resolution 2022-41 on pedestrian and transportation safety. I'm going to read part of it because this charge is what staff has used as the guidance to develop these regulations. The resolution specifically directed city staff to develop and present revised traffic calming, sidewalk requests, and street safety policies and prioritization procedures that prioritize safety and equity in the decision-making processes and planning, emphasize the well-being and safety of the most vulnerable roadway users, and prioritize best use of public space, utilize data-driven criteria for evaluating, prioritizing sidewalk and traffic calming installations and other traffic calming approaches, and for planning and identifying where safety measures are needed. Allow for multiple avenues for initiating consideration of locations that may need traffic calming or sidewalks, speed limit reductions or other measures, and make progress toward a more comprehensive approach to transportation and public space planning that prioritizes pedestrian and non-vehicle safety. So we have used this charge as our guidance in developing the administrative regulations we're discussing. Turned off my mic instead of advancing the slide, so let's try that. In January, staff presented to you draft regulations and for both the traffic calming and the sidewalk requests. We had the open comment period, 30 days as required by regulations. In the month of March until April 5th, we continued to accept comments as they came in past that date. Tonight, we have a chance to walk through where it stands now. Council may choose to accept, modify, withdraw, or take no action on the administrative regulations. And if we move forward, the public notice will be published, the full text of the admin regs will be posted online, and the new administrative regulations will go into effect July 1. The format before you is 2 regulations, which are separate but very similar. One for traffic calming and a second one for sidewalk requests. The city attorney advised that we do 2 regulations due to the fact that the administrative regulations address 2 different parts of the city code. Also, the city code has single subject and readability requirements that state a regulation should pertain to only one subject. The text, the process, and the prioritization criteria for the 2 administrative regulations are similar for ease of use and clarity. They remove the requirement for a resident petition. They add a staff review to the process early on. They use a database tool for prioritization, and the process is designed to better align with the budgeting process. I will quickly walk you through the process here. Individual residents, staff, and council members can initiate a request. Staff will develop an online request form for this process. The initiation process means that staff can look at areas that may have a general lack of sidewalks or high levels of danger and add them to the process, an element that has not been present in the existing regulations. The language of the regulations no longer includes a petition process, but it does not preclude residents getting signatures. However, whether a request is initiated by an individual or by a group doesn't change the next steps in the process. Step 2 is that staff evaluates the requests as they come in based on criteria and data identified to assess the feasibility and the priority. Step 3 is that once a project has been determined to meet the criteria, it'll be put in the Public Works Department's general project queue. That is, all projects that are reviewed will go in the queue, and staff will hold a community meeting for a discussion about design considerations of the project. Step 4 is that staff will publish the list of evaluated requests prior to the city's budgeting process. Then the prioritized list of requested projects will be submitted to the City Council for review during the budget process for funding for the fiscal year. 6, the city will develop a preliminary design for the project, incorporating feedback from the community meeting. Staff will host another community meeting to share the proposed design and collect additional feedback. And then staff will develop the designs, and the project is added to the PW's construction queue. The 2 administrative regulations use similar data for the staff evaluation. So you can see in the center of the Venn diagram, equity, safety, vulnerable road users, and TRIPS feasibility are shared by both administrative regulations. Traffic calming has an additional one of roadway characteristics, and the sidewalk requests has an additional one of identified population impact. These are the data points that make up the categories for evaluation. I'll just go through them quickly and let you know where the information comes from. For equity, the data comes from by census block through the American Community Survey. We're looking at 4 measures: income, youth, seniors, and race. Safety, the data comes from the Montgomery County Interactive Crash Map, the Montgomery County Predictive Safety Analysis, and the Tacoma Park Police Department. And we're looking at non-motorist crashes, vehicle crashes, speeding, and Montgomery County Department of Transportation predictive crash analysis locations. For vulnerable roadway users trip generators, we're looking at the types of facilities that draw people, and you would see a change in the levels of activities. For community facilities is proximity to things like schools, daycare centers, senior centers, libraries, Transportation facilities particularly highlights high-volume transit stations like the Red Line for the Metro, the Tacoma Langley Transit Station, the 2 Purple Line stations adjacent to city boundaries, bus stops with a higher ridership, and so on, and then recreation centers and parks. The roadway characteristics, which applies only to the traffic calming regulations, look at traffic control, parking and intersection. I can go into detail if you want to ask questions later. And the identified population impacts, which applies only for the sidewalk regulations, looks at the numbers of households within a quarter-mile radius, and then existing plans, if this area is highlighted in any city, county, or state planning documents. And feasibility looks at kind of the bigger picture of project-specific of what kinds of things we need to consider. Do we have the right-of-way? Are there other things that might cause conflicts? Are there contexts that would create sightline issues? That kind of thing. I wanted to go quickly over some of the feedback and updates. The public comment period for both regulations was open from March 1 to April 5th and was noticed in the city newsletter and posted on the city website. In addition to city council's feedback, the city received only comments from 3 people, with 1 additional comment received last night. And we continue to take comments up until today. So just so you know, we've had 4 people submit comments from the community. Generally, comments fell into 4 categories. The first is logistics. There were questions raised about proximity, about who should be able to initiate a request. And we heard from people who thought it should be any resident in the city of Tacoma Park should be able to initiate any request location, to the other more narrow definition of only someone who lives on the impacted block should be able to initiate. So staff put forward a quarter-mile proximity, which is 2 to 4 blocks, as a way to find a balance that we thought might meet in the middle. We heard concerns about impacted stakeholders and public outreach. Staff sees these regulations as fitting hand in glove with the general work that we do with public engagement and community outreach. We've done extensive work in the last 3 years regarding how to engage the folks that we don't generally hear from, how to take meetings and pop-ups to people where they live and work and congregate, how to operate in multiple languages with translation and interpretation services, how to use an array of tools to reach people. These efforts have become standard practice across departments and across projects with communications many touch points. The term stakeholders is used broadly, not just the folks who live on the block where an intervention may occur, but the community of people who may use it and be impacted by it. What's included in the term will vary depending on the location and neighborhood. We know that not every neighborhood has a neighborhood association. We know that not every multifamily building has a tenant organization. Not every neighborhood has the same need for translation and interpretation services, and so on. So we will cater our outreach and our public engagement as is needed. A number of comments fit the second category of sidewalk maintenance and traffic control. Maintenance, repairs, and ADA improvements are already in the purview of the Public Works Department and are managed by that department. They are not part of these administrative regulations. Traffic control requests are very different from traffic calming initiatives. Traffic control is defined by the Federal Highway Administration in their manual of uniform traffic control devices for streets and highways. And traffic control measures are also beyond the scope of these administrative regulations. If we see circumstances that meet the warrant as outlined in MUCTED, then staff would certainly move that forward on those lines, but it would not be part of the traffic calming administration process. The third category is sidewalk design considerations. ADA, we mentioned, environmental impact was raised. The city currently follows all state and city requirements when adding new sidewalks. And I have just a quick list of what that entails. Tree evaluations are compared for possible locations, and all city replanting requirements are followed. The amount of new impervious surface is recorded, and impervious abatement is installed as required through the municipal separate storm sewer system permit. New sidewalks are also examined to improve existing stormwater treatment for an area. If an investment is made in pedestrian access, the existing stormwater infrastructure will be improved before the final grade to remove any duplication work by later amendments if possible. There is no protocol for determining greenhouse gas emissions related to concrete production and installations. And the quantifying evaluation tool, we heard a number of questions raised by council wanting to know more about what that is and how it's used. So we've discussed it tonight. It's in, we added language to the administrative regulations to name these general categories and offered briefings to council members as well. So the next steps, we've done the public notice and comment period, reviewed the comments, and prepared the final regulations. City Council now has a choice of what action you want to take. If you want to accept, modify, withdraw, or take no action on the administrative regulations. And then the following steps, if it moves forward, would be public notice and the publishing of the full text of the regulation upon adoption. So I'm open to questions. I'm joined tonight also by Daryl Braithwaite, Director of the Public Works Department, and Ira Cowler, Director of Housing and Community Development, if your questions are more suitable for them. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of the work that staff have done. I have a quick question. So you said that there were 4 comments, but I thought that there was one neighborhood association that sent. So did you not receive the, I know David Reed.
I did not receive that. Jesse, did you get that?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
It didn't come to me. Happy to take a look at it.
Okay, so we'll make sure that if there were comments that were, because I think part of the challenge was that there were some people who sent comments to the council, and I'm not exactly sure if those comments got funneled through the process for commenting on the regs.
Well, I don't believe that he sent council send comments in January.
Okay.
Only just now.
Only just now. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure because we have comments that are coming in and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah, he said he missed it because he was thinking about the MMPA.
Okay. So we did not get those comments. So the 4 comments that we received were only for those individuals. We did not get that neighborhood association comments. And we still have yet other than the comments tonight. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Councilmember Small.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, I have a couple of questions about your presentation, but before I get to that, I just wanted to say or suggest that if we, as a body, decide to implement this for further processing, that the section 3 on implementation responsibility, where it says the city manager or their designee shall be responsible for the proper placement of sidewalk facilities and for overseeing the installation of city sidewalks. I believe that that language is a little less toothy than it could or should be with regard to the oversight of what are going to be administrative processes. And there's similar language with regard to the traffic calming, and I'm willing to not quibble about the rest of it personally, if that sort of check or balance on the process is there more explicitly.
Councilmember Small, do you mind repeating what section of the document you're referring to?
Yes, all right, hold on. I am,
It's
So-
under requested new sidewalk.
Got it. Thank you.
yes, it's the, and then, so there's one in the sidewalk facility request, the last, very last thing is implementation responsibility. I just think that should be slightly toothier with regard to the oversight and review of the city manager's office. And then with regard to the same area in the traffic calming, when we're talking about the evaluation request, I just want to make sure that there is some interplay that is direct and explicit between the two offices or the three offices that could potentially be at play here. Because you have HCD and planning, and then you have public works. And it would seem to me, at least in my mind, those are equal bodies of import and policy. And so there needs to be some degree of oversight from the figurehead office. And so I just wanted to make sure that it said that really explicitly somewhere in both of the sections. Other than that, the only other thing I would add to this part of the conversation is just a question about where we are concerning the decision-making on the extra slide in the slide deck about the things that we are currently have on deck. But other than that, that would be the only thing that I would suggest that we consider, is making sure that we have some explicit check and balance stuff from the senior office in both of the sections.
What is this?
I speak to that just briefly, if I believe I'm understanding what you're referring to, Councilmember Small. I just wanted to paint the picture of how this process will take place. So first we'll have the requests come in, then there'll be a date certain by which staff will evaluate all the requests, we'll rank them, we'll prioritize them. All that will be compiled in a report that'll go to council as part of the budget process. So the council will ultimately decide for the next fiscal year what funding level that you're going to set for these projects. So you'll know exactly which, our estimates of project cost, and which projects end up getting funded or not getting funded will ultimately be a council decision. Staff and the city manager will make recommendations, but the actual funding amount will dictate basically what's intended to be done. And then once that fiscal year goes into effect, the process will roll out. It also is very much integrated with community outreach and public participation. So like we do now, we have multiple community meetings on a traffic calming or sidewalk request. So the community has input into the design plan, into the review plan. In the past, for sidewalks, we had a vote. That's now eliminated. So there'll be that public feedback and comment until we ultimately arrive at a final plan. So technically, certainly the city manager's office will certainly be made aware of that, as will council members during the process. But because the council has set the funding level and the project list, it'll be very clear what the intended projects are. We can report throughout the year as to how much progress we're making and whether our cost estimates were on or off. So we can be very transparent about that. But the idea, I think, that we're trying to get to is to have a planned program, rather than now it just sort of comes in and we don't know month to month what requests we're going to get. And then a very valuable request might not be able to be moved forward because we'd already started something else. So this will enable us to evaluate the requests on an even playing field, make a recommendation, council will decide the funding level, and then we'll have our marching orders. We'll know what projects we're working on.
And I'm not, I appreciate all of those component parts of this. And I guess what I am concerned about is the burgeoning or exigent circumstances, particularly with regard to the traffic calming issues, where sometimes you guys are not the actors who get to decide when someone has decided to divert traffic through a neighborhood, or you have an expectation that it's going to take 5 years, and it's closer to 15. My son actually bet me $100 that it would take another 5 years for the Purple Line to be completed. And so I get all of those component parts of it. I guess what I'm concerned about is I wouldn't want you to. I think that there needs to be this sort of specificity and data-oriented approach in every way. I like everything about that part of it. What I am always concerned about is whether or not we end up in a situation where the data gets fudged funny, or there's an inadvertent thing that is a reality that doesn't match up with what the eye test is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would feel better if there was an explicit part in there of that the city manager can be like, look, man, X. Like, it doesn't have to be that particular city manager, but any given city manager would have some degree of ability to make a decision about something in those circumstances. But other than that, I agree. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm trying to think of a likelihood where something like that would come through. I mean,
You know what, I
because
came up with
council-
an example,
Okay.
actually, because, the city manager and I were talking about this, right? So let's say the data comes in, makes sense, making this up, let's say 13 Ave is rated higher than Hodges, right? Just because of the rubric. And then, so yes, the order, the priorities make sense. But then let's say residents are complaining and there's been like a series of 5 accidents that happen over the course of 4 days, right?
Yeah.
And
Or
so
like a bunch of babies all of a sudden move on to the street.
something
Yeah.
random happens that your data does not capture that might cause you from a leadership perspective to say, you know what, let's put Hodges up higher, right? And so I think that's
I agree.
one of the
what I'm
things
trying to
that,
say.
I know that there's been questions around being able to
Pivot.
adjudicate or how to like appeal. We don't necessarily, I appreciate residents wanting to appeal, but I think that negates the fact of us having a very data-driven approach. Like, that's kind of hard to do. But there could be some rare instances where there's something completely unforeseen through the data that's available. And I don't want to put words in Councilmember Small's mouth.
No, but I think I agree with what you're saying, though. Like, you just need to be able to have, like if there's a water main that explodes or something, and there's water coming out of the street, like, there needs to be able to be an executive decision.
Right,
made
somehow the
quick.
city
Are you
man-
envisioning this after the council's passed the budget? And we have our list of
Yeah.
projects? So then I guess we should have a discussion, and you are all the policymakers, so you decide what happens in those cases. You've
Yeah.
approved a budget, we have the list of 5 projects we're working on. Project number 6 didn't get funded, but suddenly something happens in Project 6 neighborhood, and you all decide this is a higher priority. Then what do you want to have happen? Do we pass a
Yeah.
resolution that makes a budget amendment that adds funding, or removes something that's on the list and says, you know what, we're not going to do 3, we're going to move 6 into where 3 was?
Well, my
And
argument to
again-
that would be, though, that if we are routinizing some of these things, and we do know where they're going to be, that doesn't necessarily, particularly with, like, there are too many other potential factors, whether it be substrate or weather or any number of things. And historically, we used to do the best that we could with what we had available with regard to scheduling and things like that. If we're moving toward a different thing, I understand that part of it. But I wouldn't want it to be that you guys couldn't go, look, Rob, we have X. Or that Rob couldn't go, look, guys, we have X. And then get to it if you had to.
Sure. So
That's the part that I think is
yeah,
missing.
and I think that's actually addressed, if I'm understanding correctly, I think it's addressed in the regulations as written right now. So, sorry,
All right.
Eric Keller, Director
Point me
of
out.
HCD.
Point it out to me.
So if you look in the initiation section, there's, I believe, 2 pieces you should see. So in section 1, there's 2 pieces of language that are pretty important. Actually, now that I said that out loud, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. One might be in the evaluation section. But the first thing is it says, nothing about this request process should preclude the city manager from taking action, right? So I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay, I just thought it would be at the end. That makes sense. All right,
Yeah,
I'm cool.
and then the other piece I want to just point everyone to really quickly is B3, where it says if the city manager determines that and city manager here is a placeholder for staff for the city, right? If city manager determines that a project I'm sorry, I actually got ahead of myself. Section B1, upon submission of a request, city manager will have a project evaluated, or if a project is outside the scope, and this might be outside the scope in terms of level of impact, right? We're talking multiple streets here. We're talking something that needs traffic control rather than traffic calming, or outside the scope in terms of level of exigency of a process, we can act on that, right? We don't have to go through this entire process for things that the city manager's office determines meet those thresholds. So,
Okay.
just wanted to step in and.
Thank you, Ira.
Thank you. That
Thank you, Ira.
Councilmember DeBala.
Thank you. I like the direction that these are going in quite a bit, and I had just a couple of specific things that I had, I think, sent to you. Yeah, there it is. Comments that I would like you to, well, I would like you to change it if other people agree with me. In city, in evaluation of requests, B2, excuse me. The last time we talked about this, we talked about adding a few more words to each of these. So safety, what kind of safety? Whose safety? Social equity, what does that mean, roughly? Not to put in the details about the data sources and all of that, but to flesh it out so it's a little more clear what they mean. And in the email I sent you, I suggested some words. I'm pretty sure that most of the council said that we wanted to have that the last time round.
Can we go back to your slide where we? Sorry.
Yeah, so what's on the slide is not in here.
Yeah.
It's on
So
the what?
are you, I guess what you're proposing is that we add
I
this
mean, I
to-
think you have, so I guess and I don't want to put words in Councilmember DeBala's mouth, but there aren't definitions to the various factors, but there is a reference and a definition in the table of the criteria in the back. So
Is the table now part of the regulation? Because I thought that was something that you didn't want to do. Right, so it's not.
The table is not part of the
Okay.
regulations. The reason we didn't want to put the table in, or the.
Yeah,
level of-
I'm good with that. I don't need I just do think a couple of extra words here would be very helpful.
yeah, because now, so in short, like if you, and again, I don't want to take from Councilmember DeBala, but I see where you're going. If you don't have words to describe what each of these things are, and you don't include the table, you don't necessarily need to tell them, hey, we're going to use this as a criteria, it's going to be XYZ data sources, but at a minimum, safety, we're, taking into consideration crashes, speeding, or social equity, as it pertains to vulnerable populations that live in the immediate area, so people actually know what that is. Like, I understand what vulnerable road user trip generators are because of what we have on the screen. So
Whereas I had suggested that you call it, what did I say? Facilities that generate pedestrian and vehicle trips. That's more plain English.
So if there's a way to just make it a little clearer, so folks, especially if we're not giving them the chart, they'll kind of know what those factors entail.
Madam Mayor, and perhaps if it's council's desire to have some further definition, maybe it might be reasonable to think in terms of providing those as examples, because the minute we begin to get specific, it's not an exhaustive list. And we don't want to inadvertently convey, I think, that by defining it, particularly with just a few words and briefly, that that's the whole sum of the definition of that. I think there's probably safety situations, equity situations, and so forth that we are not even conceiving of right now. And we want to just be careful if we're going to begin to define something in the specific, that it doesn't come across as an exhaustive list. In other words, the definitive definition, so that someone later says, but it's, I thought of something else, but it just doesn't fit this. One way around that perhaps would be to say such as, or, as an example, or something like that.
That works too.
Just so you don't get ourselves into that kind of a trap.
No, I think that would be helpful.
So do we need a hand vote to show that there's
Yes.
enough interest in this?
I would say let's get through everyone's list and then we can go back.
Okay, all right, so then I'll keep going. I raised in my email a question about whether the list in the regulation and the list in the table were not the same, but it might have been that I messed up looking at sidewalk and traffic as opposed to, I might have not been looking at apples and apples there. But I'd appreciate it if you'd check, because you
we
did.
check. And
Okay, so I
that's-
was looking at sidewalk
why
and
we-
traffic, not sidewalk and sidewalk. That's
Yeah.
why you did this,
Yeah,
okay.
To try and.
To help,
make it-
yeah.
Yeah.
This is,
clearer.
this is very helpful for me, thank you. I wondered, I know it's not necessary, but I think that residents, tenant, and neighborhood associations might appreciate being mentioned in the beginning here. Where is it? 1A1. A resident or neighborhood or tenant association. It doesn't have to be them, but it might make them feel better if they, because otherwise you may have a resident coming in and then the neighborhood association saying, what? Wait, we don't agree with this. And then you'll have started the evaluation process before you even realize that the neighborhood association doesn't think it's a great idea and the one person is an outlier. So that's a suggestion.
I have a question, like directly deal with that, which is, I'm not that familiar with how many resident associations there are in Tacoma Park.
Not that many.
And so I know that, from talking to other council members, that they feel that, that their residents are at a disadvantage because they don't have resident
Yeah.
associations. And so calling them out as a group that would have a power here, I don't know how that feels to other areas that don't have the residents associations.
Okay, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Councilmember Gibson?
I would be in favor of mentioning neighborhood groups, which doesn't have to be an association, neighborhood or tenant groups, that would allow particularly the identified population impact. Those people that are be most impacted, they have on their block or blocks would have some agency. And I think that by at least holding them up, that wherever we talk about both submitting a request, as there's two places that we have a potential of mentioning, like I said, the neighborhood group or association made. So I guess I'm in favor of somehow giving even agency to where there are groups that could form, whether it's a block. I mean, I've just talked 2 weeks ago with people on Lower Westmoreland. They're in the process of getting their petition. They are an informal group that are formed around trying to find traffic calming in their area, along their block, not the not the whole city. And so I think that, I agree with not requiring a petition, but I do think that giving agency and mention to neighborhood groups is a good thing, not a bad thing. Anyway, that's my position on that.
So they have agency, because one resident, group of residents, bunch of residents, but it's a question whether they're mentioned, yeah.
So, Councilmember Gibson, are you done?
Yeah, 'cause I'm
That, with that, I want to defer back to Cindy if she's not finished.
So I think, so I just want to make sure that we're all clear in terms of how aspects of the sidewalk process and traffic calming. Just as a reminder, is it not just, or I thought it was the case that neighborhood associations previously, in terms of like sidewalk requests and things of that nature, they played a little bit more of a role. So it wasn't just about requesting the sidewalks, but it was also about aspects of the process that involved people having to get some sort of approval from a neighborhood association before that item could move forward. And I think one of the reasons why we went down the path of removing the neighborhood associations from this process, it was an equity one. So it was about making sure not just that you have these neighborhood associations, but that also access to aspects of approvals gave a little bit more validity to those communities that had some neighborhood associations that were backing approvals of their request. So that was one of the things that the prior council was really trying to move past, in addition to the petition process, also trying to eliminate some of those other barriers that gives the impression that you have to be super organized in order to be able to request a sidewalk.
Mayor,
City Manager?
Mayor, if I may?
Sure.
Please.
Just in response to the question about the weight of a neighborhood association, part of our thinking in omitting that is to be as clear as possible that this is a different process, that if we get a petition with many, many signatures, it doesn't in any way change the evaluation of the project or the prioritization and what comes next. And I think that it would be confusing to people who feel like their association initiated this, or they got their signatures and it didn't impact the outcome. The existing processes also have a vote, and so a neighborhood can actually vote down a project. This process doesn't have a neighborhood vote. There isn't that kind of weight given to the immediate neighborhood because it's viewed as a public good that serves not just the immediate block where an intervention might happen, but a broader area as well. And it's an attempt to level the playing field in terms of those equity questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulcher?
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember DeBala, were you not done?
is this on the same topic?
Yeah. I just want to say, like, I personally am uncomfortable with adding in the groups back into the administrative regulation, because I feel like it's giving a special status when you're calling them out, when the status that you have here that you're working off of is the fact that you live in Tacoma Park.
Okay, yeah, I didn't mean to add it back into all the other places. I was just, okay, so that was the second point.
Excuse me, could I just
Yes.
offer one soft suggestion? Perhaps we could say Tacoma Park residents and just leave it at that.
Resident or residents, yeah.
Resident or residents, or just
Yeah, that
Tacoma Park
works.
residents. And that could include the universe of one person, multiple people, organized or unorganized. I mean, they all have
That works.
the option, but it doesn't call out group or civic association or anything specifically for the reasons that you were concerned about.
And-
It's an improvement.
And I like that. And while we're on the subject, What was the intent of calling out a permanent residence as opposed to some other kind of residence?
Because of the measures we put in about proximity, we wanted it to be where someone actually lives. It's that the permanent is assigned to their domicile, not to the person. It isn't a permanent resident. It's the house they live in as their permanent address.
So if
It's-
you look
it's
at
permanent residence.
1A1,
Residence.
yeah,
Not
it's,
permanent
it's,
residence.
Yeah, I
it's
see that.
trying to tie in that quarter mile issue. So where are you gonna measure the quarter mile from? From where they
Oh,
live,
okay,
not
that
where
makes
they
sense to me.
shop or where they work or where, it's where
Right,
they
and when
live.
you say it that way, permanent residence does have residence.
And perhaps we
We all
can
have
change
one, even
that
if we're in it for a
wording.
month.
Yeah, we can,
We could change primary.
Primary, yeah, maybe that's a little less. Yeah, primary, okay. Give me a minute.
yes, right.
So you had a slide, I had a question about,
Misreading of the.
I had a question about how you track, how a resident or residents will track progress on a request, and I think you had a slide that showed that. So,
Is it this slide?
I
with
want to
progress?
confirm that what I thought I heard was that requests are not evaluated one by one by one, they're evaluated together. So there's some time.
Well, we will likely evaluate requests as they come in and
Once
go
we get
through the
started.
ranking and
Right.
rating process, just so we don't, aren't,
Right.
put into a very tight timeline to get them
Right.
all reviewed. As we have now, there's a webpage for sidewalk and traffic calming, so we would intend to use those.
Okay,
So
so
any
then you
requests
will
that
use the
come in
webpage.
can be
Great.
listed,
Mhm.
and their ranking can also be listed. And what we present to council as the budget process will also be a public document and very much vetted and, be very available, both from council and from residents. It will live as the budget document. It'll also be on the page.
Yeah.
And then once the council determines the budget, in whatever measure, I'm assuming it'll be in the CIP, but however we decide to fund it, that will also be included as a document in the budget. And so they'll know what was funded. The question is sort of how do you track progress going through the fiscal year? So we will have to develop a work plan relative to the projects that are approved. We won't really be able to do that until the budget's
Yeah.
adopted.
Yeah,
So
my,
once the
my
budget's
question was,
adopted,
my question was more how to track it before it gets rated and gotten on into the budget. And I think you answered the question.
it'll be on the city's
webpage,
webpage.
so people aren't gonna have to wait 6 months to find out
No,
what happened to it.
we
you.
we will load it as they come
Right,
in.
and then my last question, I understand why traffic, like stop signs and stuff have to be separate. Can you also be using these criteria, cause they're relevant in addition to or does it have to be what FHA says only and nothing else? And similar question with lowering speed limits, how do they fit into this system?
Yeah, in terms of traffic control devices, there is specific language in the city code as to city manager's authority over signage.
Mhm.
So there's a current process now. Someone could ask the police or public works or council members, we want a stop sign, we want a, traffic sign.
Right.
It gets evaluated by a collaboration within the departments, the police, planning, and public works, and then we do an internal memo to the city manager with a recommendation. City manager ultimately makes the decision. If the decision is approved, then we implement that change. So
Right.
it doesn't have to be weighted, it doesn't have to wait for a funding process. It's a much more, typically lower cost and much more directive kind of thing. Is
Right.
the stop sign appropriate here or not? Do we need a no parking sign here or not?
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, I was just wondering if, not to hold these regs up, but if the criteria that are here would also usefully apply to those decisions.
perhaps roadway safety and accidents, but population and pedestrian generators. I mean, when you're evaluating stop sign, there's very different criteria that you're
Okay.
using.
Thank you.
And same
And-
with no parking signs. I'm trying to think of other examples.
All the things I've been
Yeah.
asking about recently.
Yeah.
But what about the broader question of speed limits? now that we've got the authority to do lower speed limits, would you have them be in this?
Well, and I may not
This is
be
my last
currently
question, I
up to
promise.
date, but this, as far as I understand, kind of our conundrum in the past with the state law change to allow speed limits of lower than 15 is there needed to be a traffic engineering
Right, and that
analysis.
changed this year.
So if that has changed.
Yes.
Then we'll need
I'll
to
send it to you.
reevaluate that and determine if that can then become,
Part of this
Yeah.
system. Okay, not to hold this up,
yeah.
because it can always be added in once y'all decide that. But
And I
just
would
to-
think that a speed limit decision would have very many of those same criteria.
Right, okay.
Different than no parking signs and
All
stop
right, I
signs.
will
We would
find this-
definitely be
I'll
evaluating.
find the legislation, and now that you're part-time back, I'll send it to you. And so the only thing that is more immediate is that first one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gibson.
Plus I think, Cindy, that as the city managers, the word S on residents
Yep.
was agreed to as
Yep.
well.
I can give everyone a quick recap. So,
Yeah.
so far, one minor edit is making it clear that Tacoma Park resident and in parentheses S, right? I heard primary residence instead of permanent resident. I heard possibility of providing a little bit more language around the different factors, not being overly explicit, but using things like, for example, including but not limited to, those kinds of things. Also heard from Councilmember Small, just making sure, and it seems like there's those extra options are there, but around the city manager's authority to be able to make necessary pivots, specifically in B3 and I guess this is A3.
Yeah, it's just technically being both.
Yeah. Both places where that language is there. Okay.
Thank you for, so I want to bring up another.
So, I'm so
item.
sorry, Councilmember, just on those items, I think we're, the only one that I think we would need more clarity on is the last
The
one you
last
just
one?
mentioned there. I think that, from my perspective, that language is sufficient, so if there's something more you need there, we would just need to know that before the end of the day.
Use your mic, Councilmember Small.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I was thinking maybe if just some kind of a restatement of, or something at the end of the document, so like if somebody's looking at it, they know it's in there.
Okay.
Because essentially what you said is what I was concerned about. It just, because it's sort of in there, it's not explicit. And it'll just, I feel like it would just save you some headaches with the people for them to know.
So Councilmember Small, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, and that I'm looking at the right thing, but it looks like,
I think it's from
Yeah, Ira, what
section-
was the section that you had?
Section 1A4 is the, nothing in these regulations shall be construed as preempting the city manager.
Yes, I feel like something like that should be the last part of a document. So that,
in the implementation responsibility section?
yeah, like it could just be another restatement or pursuant to note whatever infra, just so it's in there twice. That's really, as far as the drafting thing, that's really all I'm concerned about.
We can duplicate that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Gibson?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce, I guess, ask for clarification, and then we'll take it from there. My read of the criteria or factors that have been identified suggests that in most all cases, you're looking at a half square mile, quarter mile radius, which is a half square mile, for the applicability of the factor. Is that correct?
I think it's relative to
I think
the
it's a-
request. who's making the request. If it's an individual, there's a quarter-mile designation
But-
there.
but no, for the-
Beyond that would be the vulnerable road user trip generator.
But I guess when I'm looking at the different factors, you have road characteristics, you've got within 1/4 mile, community facilities within 1/4 mile, that most of these factors, I guess, are defined as within a radius of 1/4 mile, which is a half square mile. Is that not correct? Did I misread?
You mean
That you're looking, the data that you're getting, whether it's
Sure, the quarter
equity
mile
or
would
whether
go
it's
around the
safety,
circle.
it's, et cetera, it's within, it's a half square mile roughly, or a 1/4 mile radius.
Radius,
Not
I
quite,
think
that's
it's
not
a
the same
safer.
thing, but
Yeah.
it's close. So I guess my concern is that really does not capture the data that's necessary to make a good decision about a specific block, where the population would be most impacted. That if there's so I'll go back to the case of my lower Westmoreland. A 1/4 mile radius would include the junction. And so if there's a traffic accident on the junction, that weighs in, that changes their score for that proposed project. And the same thing that the population of Victory Towers has, say, 200 seniors. So that changes the equity calculation for that. And it has really nothing to do, I mean, very, very little to do with the applicability of a traffic calming device on lower Westmoreland. What does play into that, the factor that I think would be is, are there accidents or near accidents on that street? Is there speeding on that street, and any pedestrian corridor, not radius of a 1/4 mile, but a pedestrian corridor going up to Carroll? That's important, and perhaps the number of children. The main reason why people in Westmoreland, lower Westmoreland, want to have traffic calming is they have a lot of young families that have moved in because they previously had a petition that was not accepted. Anyhow, so I guess I have a major problem with the scope or the scale of the data, or the lack of geographic targeting. And so I'd like to go back and look at the factors and see if they can't be more targeted, more precise to the impacted area. And
I hear what you're saying, and certainly when we're evaluating data, we're going to be looking at data within that immediate area and then go beyond, and try to see if there's a connection. So we'll have that information, what crashes are taking place on that block, within the next block, what's the population of that block within the next block, and then we'll go out beyond to make sure we're catching contiguous and related other information.
We also know that pedestrians do walk a half a mile or more. People walk, the elementary schools don't bus anything less than
that's why the pedestrian
a mile.
corridors are important. The routes to a school, the routes to, and as I said, Westmoreland going up to Carroll, I recognize that. It just didn't look, when I was looking at how you describe these factors, it did not look as fine-tuned as, Daryl, as you're talking about it, that you first look at the impacted area, then you work your way out. I thought you're going to get a data set that says, this 1/4 mile radius, it says there's 5 crashes. Okay, and that would be a defining, that would define, the rating in 1 to 4, because there's 4 crashes. If it's more nuanced than that, it just didn't come across in this material.
And Roz, may I ask a clarifying question? I think the 1/4 mile section that you're referring to is under project initiation, is that right?
No, it's under almost all of the factors. If you read the factors, they talk about a 1/4 mile radius.
Gotcha,
It's
thank you.
not just that one.
Okay.
Equity, I mean, I presume that you would want to know, for example, in Westmoreland, how many kids there are. Yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't matter that there's a lot of kids up on Goody Avenue where I live, which is still within a quarter-mile radius. So
Well, one of the things that I do, and I should know this, but it's 10:30, the actual radius of a census block. So I don't want us to conflate that all of these data elements are actually for a quarter-mile radius, because they're not. A lot of these are actually coming from the American Community Survey, which is census data, and that's census block. And so for some aspects of our community, that census block data may include other counties, right? It may be outside of the city, some parts that are outside of the city. So I think that, we use the data as a way to provide the extra clarification around what we may witness on the scene. I think that there are some places, some of these elements that clearly are related to the street in which you were talking about. So if you're talking about the potential number of people served, like the potential number of people served will likely be the number of households on that street, the number, those kinds of things. But I don't want us to think of the need to have this data at such a minute level that it's not, one, feasible to collect unless you're going door to door, and two, negates the fact that traffic is like water, it flows. So yes, what matters at the junction matters for Westmoreland, because the more chaos is there, the more cars you have coming through, the more buses you have trying to cut through. So it does have some implication. So I just want us to be clear in terms of what is appropriate for there to be a quarter-mile radius that we've determined, because we have somewhat of an ability to set that parameter. And then what are those things that are outside of our control based solely on the data sources that are available?
And that's a really important point. Data is messy. So
Yes.
as much as we want database decisions, we have to recognize that we are dependent on what data we can use. So the equity measures are all census, that's all block data. That's not quarter mile, that's not,
Okay, good.
the 7,900 block of something. It's census block data. The crash measures are mapped by location. You can see precisely where those happen. So that's a
Within a
different,
quarter mile.
that's different. We're also dependent on Montgomery County's data, and the predictive crash comes from the county as well. So we're only as good as our data can get us, but we can't get it all.
Right.
The speeding, we will ask police to put out counters, and they can do volume
Right.
and speed. And we will see what that shows. It doesn't always seem to line up with people's observations, but it's another data point for us to consider.
Mhm. Thank you. Well, I'm glad to know that not all of these factors are within that quarter mile radius. I still think that it does not, I'm still concerned about recognizing what Daryl is talking about, the sort of the nuanced, looking at corridors, looking at starting at the impacted population first, and then working out. So if that could be better clarified, that would help me. And then I'll just say one other thing that I'll recommend as an amendment to this is that if we proceed with these guidelines, that we promise that they will be reviewed after the first year to see how they go. Much like we did the public space management plan, after the first year it will be reviewed. So this is a recommendation that I would have, that if we accept these guidelines, that they will be reviewed after the first year.
So I just, there's two things that I want to make sure that I get clarity on. So the first, Councilmember Gibson, you said that, are you implying weighting of the criteria in terms of the identified population impact, like applying more weight to the data that you're able to identify with on the block versus this other data that has a larger radius? Or are you?
each factor should look a specific.
Can you hit your mic?
I'm suggesting that each one of these factors start, as Daryl say, start working from the impacted community, block, whatever, out.
But you're not implying that there's any additional weight that should be given towards those more localized data elements versus
If there's a
others?
crash that's, yeah, it's more, if there's a crash in that block, it's more important than a crash that's a quarter mile away. Yes, I would say that data, if we don't get that, then we might as well, I think that's the minimum that we could suggest with crash data. And speeding, again, those specific traffic-related things need to be focused on where the impact is most felt.
Yeah,
So thank you so much for that feedback. I just, from a process standpoint here tonight for the administrative regulations, the only, I'll just point out that the, what would I call this? Spreadsheet, the table with the like data points and kind of data parameters is not a part of the administrative regulations, intentionally so, because of those types of questions that we just raised around the messiness of data, the need to be flexible and understand how crash data might be different on one block than another block and how we might need to have those tiers, right? So if we wanted to have more specificity or definition around the data points criteria, the only place we could do that in the existing regulations, or sorry, the draft regulations in front of you, I guess would be B2, right, where we lay out those criteria, and you've asked us for a little bit more language. I mean, this is where it's that catch-22 of we could get a lot more detailed about those data points, but then we also limit our ability to say, hey, but this street has, either there's a data point we don't have right now that is better in the future, or this, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? And so the choice we made for the moment was not to include that level of detail here, because that is not about process, it's about evaluation, right? But if we did want to include that, that would be the place I suppose it would have to go in. So
Great. No, I agree with that approach, because it limits your, as long as you say in your reg that we are evaluating each proposal based on criteria that relate to these specified factors, then you allow yourself the flexibility when it comes to implementation to pivot. And that pivot could be, hey, we have a new data source. Hey, we're realizing that one data source isn't available anymore. It allows you to have the ability to do that pivot. So to me, it makes sense to keep it more general from the perspective of we plan to use a criteria based on the following factors, but not go into a lot of nuanced detail around the actual methods in terms of how things would be evaluated.
I respectfully disagree that some level of clarity on what you're attempting to do, the principles of your data evaluation. And it goes a little bit with the definition without tying your hands. But I could just envision folks who have that if there aren't really clear principles for the data collection beyond equity, safety, that you'll have blocks or neighbors that are just totally aghast at why they weren't prioritized over another. So it helped to clarify those principles, I think.
Yeah,
and I think one of the principles is that there is a focus on those most impacted, and working out. I mean, that's not throwing changing the data at all, or I don't think it's
Well, and I hope the
restricting us.
table defines that. To me, the table are the principles. I think they clearly reflect what we're going for.
Which table we're talking about now?
The
one in your packet.
table of the criteria that we're going to use to evaluate.
Yeah, this.
Yes.
So I would just, I want to respond to the idea of who's the most impacted, because I think that you're considering the most impacted to be the people who live on the block where an intervention happens.
Those people that feel afraid that their children might get hit, yes.
And the people who want their children to walk safely on sidewalks from their house to school a half a mile away, are they part of your impacted? Because streets and sidewalks
Like I
are
said,
used
there
by-
are corridors that need to be followed. I mean, I think, but again, and so I'm not, I'm saying that less are impacted, that there's a target site and there's a target population working out.
I think it does get challenging to identify who's most impacted from time to time for the very reasons that Roz has
Okay, well.
outlined. And, we could probably talk all night about that, but, yeah.
And then the last issue that I had brought up, whether this flies or not, is that we would include a review of this after the first year.
So question about our reg process in general and the frequency of updates would be helpful.
Yes, I actually think my proposal for how we address that point is I think if we all want to move forward, we're going to have a resolution anyway rescinding your prior 2015 resolution. We can make that a fuller resolution here that talks about adoption or something like that, memorialize this adoption and include within that a whereas clause that says we'll come back in a year, just like we did with the 2022 resolution that, laid out when we'd come back. We can include that in the resolution, because I don't know if it makes sense in the regulations themselves necessarily, so.
Fair
if
enough.
that's.
And in
That's fair
terms of
enough. Okay.
timing, if this goes into effect July 1st of this year, our first round of evaluating requested projects will be December of this year. And then it'll go into the budget process for fiscal year '26. So in a year's time, we won't really we'll be 3/4 through it, 2/3 through it. So it's actually would likely be more than a year's time before we'll have gone through a full cycle.
All right.
And of course, during
and-
the budget process, you'll
And
have
I
your
will
own way to
presume
review
that
it.
there are things that you might learn along the
Most
way. For
definitely.
example, community engagement. Again, is it, how many, there may be ways that you'll learn and revise, and so, yeah,
For
I
sure.
understand that.
Okay. Councilmember Fulcher?
I was wondering, I think I have these in like 3 buckets. So for staff recommendations of sidewalks or traffic calming projects, how would that go through the city manager's office? Is that the intended plan right now?
I think it would get listed as a project. It would be,
It would be evaluated
Yeah.
as any other project.
Okay, but
That
like,
would be in-
And it would
for
be-
instance, if our Safe Routes to Schools person was like, I really think that we should consider, moving forward with such and such project, is that?
It would be
the-
written up, submitted, evaluated, ranked, presented to council, and we would identify where the request came from, city staff, community, school, whatever. So you'll know all that when you're making your funding decisions.
And so sort of like for a vision of a more walkable Tacoma Park and, having a more holistic continuity of sidewalks, is that something that you envision you as staff are going to be keeping an eye on and recommending projects? Or are you going to be depending on community members to making those recommendations?
We will now have a tool that will enable us to do that kind of policy planning where we were hampered in the past from doing that.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then, so when we have these scores and rankings going through your prioritization criteria, so that'll help sort of order projects for us to look at and, what has the heavier weight and what's lighter. Will those weights stay with that project to be considered again the next year?
Sure, I
if
think
we don't-
anything that doesn't get included in the first cycle will still stay on the list with the next projects that come up. Because it may be that we have a highly rated project, but the funding doesn't get there. So it'll stay there until the next year and have another opportunity. I think the fact that it has been waiting, we'll need to figure out some way to acknowledge that this was a request received 2 years ago, rated, however it was rated.
And then is there a way for projects to get eliminated, or are they just gonna have a low score and sit at the bottom of the list?
I think that's our assumption, that they'll be, their rating will reflect their either lack of feasibility or lack of import.
And then with a project that would be low, that someone might think something has changed, at what point would a resident be able to say, hey, I'd really like you to reevaluate this project?
I think at any time, given that we will have an end of December, compilation period again, and there'll be that time in the budget process. Also, a council member can raise it, a resident can go to council and say, this is rated too low, we think it should be higher, and you guys will ultimately decide whether you want to circumvent our process, or, allow it to proceed.
And then when will the information that you're going to be, like, let's say that I'm a resident, non-council member, and I submit my request, when will my request be available for public view, and when will that score that's been attached to that request become available for public view as well?
Yeah, I'm assuming that with the webpage, when we get a request in, we'll note it, and just define it as whatever way we can define it based on the application. We'll have a seamless form, which is how we typically do applications through the website. So the information we gather from that, we'll synthesize it and post it on a list. I would imagine that the ranking, we wouldn't publish the ranking until the end of the year, and we've done the full evaluation of all projects. We may rank them before then, but I don't know that we'd publish that earlier than all together, so everyone can see the ranking of the entire list.
I think it's only meaningful in context.
Yeah.
So if you find out that your project was a 13 and there aren't any others
Right.
ranked, you don't know what to do with that.
Right, you might think you surely are getting your project done and have false hope.
So it would be, right, I think it being in context is important.
Okay.
And those rankings will be there, certainly council in the budget process, you can ask us why it had the score it did. We'll be able to provide that background.
Okay. And then lastly, with our traffic calming considerations, I think right now bicycle lanes are not part of that consideration, and our road diet's part of a traffic calming consideration right now, and so I don't know if there's like appetite for doing that, like while we're taking care of this other stuff, just because when I look at, like, let's say Tacoma Avenue, a really wide street that some bike lanes might eat into that wideness and make people less interested in going so fast. Maybe this is a good time to do some of those other things.
Yeah, we haven't discussed how bike lanes will be incorporated into this process, or if they will. Yeah, roadway diet, I can see sort of, certainly in a situation where speeding is an issue, one-way roads may become part of this process as well. So I think, to me, that more synonymous with traffic calming.
Where are our traffic calming tools, devices defined for residents to look at, or for your engineers to look
I don't believe
at?
we have anything on the website currently. We have a document that we provide in community meetings when we're having traffic calming discussions.
So they are defined at the top of the administrative regulations. Here it says traffic calming devices such as blah, 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 blah.
But such as, I mean, that doesn't mean only.
No, that says includes, I'm sorry, it doesn't say such as. Traffic calming devices include, so.
Okay.
But we could potentially add information to the webpage, similar to the public meetings that we've had, where we have a handout that says most restrictive, least restrictive, pictures of, what's a bump out, what's a chicane, what's a one-way street, what's a bollard, we have that stuff. So we'd have to create that. It doesn't currently exist on the website.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to speak to kind of the, let's call them like the bigger questions, right? The questions that within these administrative regulations would trigger that, upon submission, city manager may decide these are, traffic calming, roadway diet questions. I just want to point out and thank council for two very important budget items that you provided us with in FY25. One is the transit planner position, right, which would be kind of a critical portion of helping us determine that ultimate process for how those are looked at in a more comprehensive way, and also the money for the traffic studies within the CIP funding, right? And the regular predictability of that helps us understand, hey, maybe we do need a road diet here, but we need to understand that, that has greater impact than just that one block, in the same way that, we'd really want to have a full engineered study to understand a lot of those things, so.
And so I know we're running long. A couple quick things, which kind of piggybacks off of where we kind of left off around the community engagement, and outside of the discussion about the reg, right? But once this goes into effect, it would be helpful for council to know what is the rollout plan in terms of how we're communicating to our residents around the shift in process. So everyone kind of knows where to go. It seems like there would be an online form for people to complete, making sure that people understand. One of the things that is, I say, if you ever want to tear a community apart, build a sidewalk, right? And so what are some things that we can do to try to mitigate some of that? So, if individual residents put forward a request for aspects of traffic calming, and now that we don't have the petition process, it's data driven, it could be a high data need, but others on the street may have some issues. So what are some ways in which we can clearly communicate to residents that this is a data driven approach? Don't trip your neighbor because they asked for the speed bump. So what are, just making sure that once we kind of have some of this clear, that, we can come back to the council, and that part will be fleshed out. And then the last question I have is, so the cadence of your data that we're using for the criteria varies, right? They update at different times. And so to what extent, because I know that some traffic calming related sidewalk projects can linger around in the budget for a couple years. To what extent are you all planning to, when new data comes in, updating scores? So and what impact that could be? Because sometimes, like I said, something could sit in the queue for a couple of years waiting on funding. And by that time, either it could have gotten worse, or it could have gotten, for various reasons, it could have gotten better. So is there a plan to, when data comes in, to update numbers, or is it sticking with the score that you got when you came through the door?
Well, we certainly do it annually as part of that annual review process and ranking in preparation for the budget. So at least once a year that's going to happen. Whether or not it will happen sooner than that, I think it's realistic to say once a year when we're doing the full evaluation. In terms of the public outreach, certainly if this is decided and this regulation is administrative regulation goes into effect, we envision a newsletter article that will lay out the new program. Certainly the website that we've spoken about will have to be launched and expanded. The other piece that we've included and baked into the regulation is that for each of the projects that we get a request in, whether it's ranked high or low, we do a community meeting. So there'll be a community meeting for each project. Okay. At least that's what's laid out in the plan now. Mm-hmm. So that people are aware that we've gotten this request, it's going to be rated, here's the process, here's where council decides funding. If you want to yay or nay it, these are your opportunities to engage. Great. And then what will happen once it's funded, and we lay out the scenario.
Perfect. Awesome. Councilmember Gibson, we have two more work sessions.
Quick question. It may have been answered. There is a map of showing the sidewalk gaps. Then
existing sidewalks. We have a map of existing sidewalks.
So which would be presumably one of the factors in terms of assessing whether a sidewalk is needed, is where the gaps are most important in terms of pedestrian.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we have that map currently already up on the website, and we also have our existing traffic calming map on the website.
Right. But I think we had some public comments earlier that implied that repairing existing sidewalks may be secondary to new. And I would say, depending on any modifications, if it's a tripping hazard or if it ultimately makes it a hazardous walk, it would need to be prioritized for repair.
Yeah, and those are really entirely different
process.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Maintenance work is a responsibility and a liability of the city. So if we have a sidewalk in bad shape, the city is liable for that and needs to address that. So we identify those defects and, have a work schedule based on funding. Supplemental to that, the council has for a while funded our ADA work. So to the degree that we have annual funding, we implement, and we're up to 86% of the city sidewalks have been revised and renovated for ADA compliance. Our goal is to get to 100% and then stay on it and identify defects that have come up since then. We're currently now trying to start with the sidewalks. We did brick for tree root protection and replace it with permeable pavement because the bricks are just not providing a very stable surface. So, again, there'll always be work to do, but that maintenance work is funded separately within the CIP, and it really has its own trajectory and need. I see it as very different. Kind of painting your house versus building a house. Yeah.
Thank you all again so much. We really appreciate it. And so just so that everyone kind of is aware of next steps. So it sounds like there's a council request for some modifications. One of the things that we want to make sure is that those modifications are clearly communicated, and I want to make sure that we're not there's some things that would be a part of the resolution that we would have absolving the prior resolution. There are some things that we talked about today that are minor, some aspects of minor edits that folks want. There are some pieces that may be a little bit more, so we may have to, I'm trying to think through whether or not we need a separate resolution or one resolution.
Well, I think if I might propose a process here, so, and apologies for our conferring there, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was in agreement here. So I think most of the things that were proposed here, we can consider kind of not needing a motion, fine, we'll make a few edits if we're going to come back for a resolution anyway next week. You'll see those edits, make sure we got the parentheses S in there. I'm talking like those things. I think the things I heard that we would need a motion on if you want them changed, and maybe we don't need, well, we can maybe talk about them for a second, are the kind of pieces around the evaluation criteria component specifically. So, I heard some discussion around either adding what I interpreted as like not just safety, but more language around what safety means. And then I also heard a discussion around maybe adding specific data points or definitions of data points. So I think for that section, that 3B section, if you all want something more in there, I would politely request maybe a motion to understand specifically what that is, because I think from, staff's perspective, we don't have the will of council on that based on that discussion so far tonight. Well, I mean, I don't know. Do we think that there was anything else beyond that felt? No. Yeah, I think everything else felt, appropriate to us. I mean, we'll send out a memo summarizing what we heard as the changes here tonight, and if there's other big things that we missed, we could certainly ask for a vote on them before adopting anything next week.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So there were two separate asks, and there's one that says, hey, we're using terms in the regs. Can we provide a little bit of a little language to kind of help someone to understand what a vulnerable road user trip generator is, right? That's just flowery language, not very specific in terms of just giving people context. And then there's the other components that I believe Councilmember Gibson was referring to around the actual criteria that we're using and how, we want to prioritize certain aspects within that criteria. I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be, unless Councilmember Gibson is implying that this gets actually incorporated into the reg, where you're trying to incorporate it into the reg, which was, my perspective is no, we don't put that in the reg. If we want staff to come back in a year to walk us through the criteria, if we want there to be certain aspects of a weighting approach that we want them to propose, that's a resolution that is separate from the actual reg itself, right? Because that's the criteria that relates to the implementation. So I guess the question is for Councilmember Gibson, are you implying that there needs to be changes to the reg itself?
I guess I was hoping that that's the case. If there's, I don't sense that the will of the council is with that, so that if it doesn't, if it's handled separately, as you said, explained after a year, I'll go along with that.
Okay, so.
I mean, unless I'm missing the point.
No, and we can send an email because it's late. We'll send something to kind
Yeah,
of clarify.
all right.
But if that's the case, if most of the questions are around the data and the actual implementation, then the edits that we've talked through, and I'm happy to kind of go through them again, for the reg itself would mean that we wouldn't necessarily need to have a separate resolution beyond what we've already communicated in terms of some of the minor edits, including the language description around the different sections, right? And then there would be a separate resolution where we're dissolving the prior resolution, asking you all to come back. And if there's any aspects about what that comeback looks like walking us through, criteria, lessons learned, whether or not there needs to be any adjustments to the criteria, that's something that could be worked out amongst council in that separate resolution. Am I making sense, or is it 11 o'clock and I'm losing folks?
You lost me a little bit, but
Yeah, okay. So again, in the document itself, we're not going into detail about the criteria. We're only saying that we're having one. But there are members of council that want there to be more discussion and lessons learned around the criteria. How we're using it, what data is there, how are we ranking certain things. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that we do right now, right this instant, but once you imply the criteria and you come back to council to talk about this is the ranking, this is how it went.
I think I follow. Okay, so in the resolution that we will bring to you to adopt these administrative regulations, will include language about returning in 1 year, and within that return, we'll talk about that we can discuss how the evaluation data points and criteria went, what we learned, go more in depth into that and solicit.
And whether or not any modifications are needed.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. So the only changes I'm sorry to belabor this, just really want to make sure we don't miss anything. The only changes we're going to make then prior to this resolution are the changes in the initiation section around residents and permanent versus primary, and then the request from Councilmember Small regarding kind of restating the city manager authority in section 3, I believe, towards the end of the document as well.
And then the
All
other
right,
piece was
yep,
to add
yep.
some
I'll walk
minor-
through it. So in section 1, where we say a Tacoma Park resident, we need to have in parentheses S for residents. Where we say permanent resident, it should be primary residence.
Yep.
Where we have in section B, the city's evaluation will consider the request in light of the following factors, providing some additional context around the factors so that folks who are reading the regs will understand what those are. Councilmember Small also asked for us to restate A4 as part of the implementation responsibility section. So I think it was A4, whereas nothing in these regs shall be construed as preempting the city from installing, altering, blah, 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 blah. His point was to restate aspects of that at the end where we talk about implementation responsibility.
Perfect. We got it all then.
The flowery language, was that in there?
Yep.
Yep. So I got that. So thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Gibson, did you have another light? Okay. All right, so next we're gonna talk about budget.
Quarterly financial report was next
Yep.
in line. suggestion to Mayor and Council, given the hour, we have a presentation, but it's available online. We could answer questions. I would prioritize doing the presentation on the next item, which is the budget amendment. But your call. I just, in the interest of time, unless there were, in your review of what you've seen so far, you wish to have the presentation and the discussion, we'll accommodate that, but my suggestion would be that perhaps we forego the presentation and we'll stand ready as staff to answer any questions.
Yep, that works.
Now or later.
That works. Let's move on to, so are we tabling the financial report Q3? We can have that on the agenda for, on an upcoming agenda, and we're just moving to budget amendment number 4?
Is it tabling it or just,
So we're not going through the presentation?
it's up to you all.
Or Q&A, so I think it might make more sense for us to just table this item for next week for the work session. And then if the priority is the budget amendment number 4, then we just walk through the budget amendment number 4.
Okay, I know we're pretty packed with upcoming agendas, but whatever your pleasure. If you want us to just go ahead and go through it, we can. Yeah, we could focus on the slides that show the true differences between last year.
Okay. Okay, so we can have, I'm looking at the rolling agenda now. It looks like we're going to be voting on budget amendment number 4 next week, so that should be the priority because we need a vote. Quarterly financial report third quarter is not something that we're going to vote on. The only items that we have on next week's agenda is the library construction update, the Board of Elections, and what we just discussed, which is the resolution that we just walked through. So my hope is that given the discussion tonight, walking through that resolution won't be long, and therefore we can have the quarterly financial report for the third quarter on next Wednesday.
Yeah. You also do have the presentation on results of Laurel Avenue traffic study that evening.
And that's on Wednesday, the 5th?
12. You're looking at the date.
So what I'm saying is we can do this on the 5th. So quarterly, the third quarter, we're going to move that to the 5th. And that way the other items, because it's just a work session. Okay?
Okay, sure.
So
Thank you.
are we ready for budget amendment number 4? All right.
Yes, Susan is here.
Thank you, Susan. You deserve a medal.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and councils. I just want to give a summary overview of the budget amendment 4. We have the covering sheet, and we also have the ordinance. So I would like to say that in the 4 budget amendment, the city has an overall expenditure increase about $1,253,089. This amount is detailed in the table on the 2nd and the 3rd page of the covering memo. Okay, the increase include 9,279 rise in the equipment replacement expenditure within the general fund, and $1,243,810 increase in the speed and red light camera fund. The $9,279 increase in the general fund's equipment replacement expenditure is due to the emergency replacement of an irreparable machine shop compressor. In the speed and red light camera fund, the most significant impact is a revenue reduction of $1.6 million, comprising $1.3 million from red light camera fines and $290,000 from the speed camera fines. The decrease in the red light camera fine is due to the delayed implementation of the red light camera program, while the reduction in the speed camera fine results from fewer violations. Concurrently, there is an expenditure savings of about $346,000. On the last page of the cover memo, the table shows the estimated general fund balance change from the first budget amendment to the fourth budget amendment. The initial fund balance was $11.2 million. After the fourth budget amendment, the projected fund balance is going to be about $10 million. This reduction is primarily due to a net expenditure increase of $526,000 and a $700,000 interfund transfer from the unassigned reserve to speed and red light camera fund in the fourth budget amendment. We will review the actual fund balance at the year end to determine the final interfund transfer amount. So this is about our fourth budget amendment is really very light compared to other higher volume amendment items in here. And in terms of the special revenue fund, because the revenue and the expenditure increase is also $500. So that's why the special revenue fund subtotal should be zero. There's no increase and no reduction. Okay, so I would like to see if you have any questions. I can answer questions.
Okay, Councilmember DeBala?
Yeah, maybe it's the late hour, but bear with me. So on the speed camera fund, we thought, on the red light camera fund, we thought we were gonna get 1.3 million.
Yes.
We didn't get it. And we had programmed to spend some or all of that.
We at the beginning of the fiscal year 24, the budgeted revenue for the red light camera was 1.3 million.
Right, okay.
And the implementation has been delayed. So finally, we found out from.
Right. My question was, how we were going to spend the 1.3 million, all of it or part of it?
This is the 1.3 million is the revenue. It's not expenditure.
Right, but I'm asking, did we have a plan for using that money?
Yes, you're asking what expenditures against those revenues were anticipated. So
Thank you
there
for
were, because we didn't
explaining
exercise the contract, we also had a reduction in expenditures.
Yeah. So the red light camera expenditure contract is about $266,700 reduction. That's the expenditure savings due to the delay in implementation of the red light camera program.
That's the question.
So so all of these reductions have to do with reductions in running the red light camera fund, running and operating it.
Some of them, just two reduction are related to the red light camera program. One is the red light camera contract, and the other one is the promotion cost of $9,000. okay? Those two are related to the red light camera contract, while the others are related to the speed camera contract.
Okay,
And the
What-
total speed camera and red light camera fund expenditure savings is about $346,190.
right. So I guess it's not in here. How are we gonna cover the expenditures that we were gonna use the red light camera money for? So is that gonna, did we do that already and I forgot?
It's included in this fourth budget amendment, so there's a transfer of $700,000 from the general fund reserve to the speed camera to cover expenses that are needed, but we don't have
Thank you.
funding for.
Okay, and where is that? Again,
It's
for
in
some
this
reason, I'm just not getting it.
Susan, where is the $700,000 transfer covered? Is that in the budget amendment specifically?
The
or is that just in the-
$700,000 transfer is covering the deficit in the red light and speed camera.
Where is it captured in the
Yes,
documentation that we have?
The cash,
Is it in the resolution itself?
well, because I did not include the fund balance in here for the speed and red light camera, which we do not usually include. So that's why it's not in here. But with my calculation, approximate
It'll be
amount that we need to transfer from the general fund to the red light and speed camera fund is about $700,000. But as I said,
We have
this
that.
could change
Yes,
at the year end when we
Yes.
see the actual expenditure and the actual revenue received in the speed camera and red light camera fund.
Okay, thank you for explaining it to me.
Sure,
So it's
sure.
not in the actual ordinance, but it's in this table at the end, what your estimate is of what we're gonna need to transfer to cover the expenditures that we intended would be red light camera money. Thank you. I think I got it.
Okay, I think I got it now too, because it was taking me a moment. Because it just dawned on me. At first, I'm like, what is happening? And then it dawned on me, this is Q4. This is Q4.
Yeah, this is,
So I'm better now.
Yeah.
So basically, the fact that we did not have our red light cameras all of FY '24
yes,
means that we ran at a deficit. And quite frankly, because we also budgeted expenditures against that revenue that we never recouped.
exactly,
That's why at the end, when everything shook out, we were short 1.3.
exactly.
Now that we have the red lights, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed for
Fingers
fiscal year
crossed.
'25.
And we did not do what we did the last time, which is pre-spend money we did not have. That part. So once we start to recoup those dollars and we actually get the red light cameras going, fingers crossed, that extra monies could be transferred over, which would allow us to balance out. And it sounds like you're already planning to transfer monies to make sure that,
Well, actually, we'll see what we actually receive for the red light camera fine, because right now it's still an estimate of 1.3 million.
okay.
And the chief was saying that he might be underestimating the revenue. So we really don't know how much would be the actual red light camera revenue until we actually have the program implemented and then we receive the fines and things like that so we can determine the actual revenue. But right now, everything is estimated.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you. I'm so sorry that you've had to spend the night.
It's a
But
lot
this
of
has
good
been very
information that I've been listening to.
Awesome. So seeing no more lights and we have council members that are dropping like flies. All right.
All right.
Everyone, thank you so much, Director Chung, for sticking it out.
Thank you.
And I just want to check to make sure I have a motion to adjourn. Thank you very much, Councilmember Fulcher. Everyone have a great night.